Well, good morning. Welcome to the 12th Annual Powertrain Strategies for the 21st Century Conference. We're looking at tipping points for EVs. And we have a variety of speakers from some from suppliers, manufacturers, government, and consulting to give us some insight into the tipping points for EVs, when they're happening, when they might happen. One of the things that we have been studying is looking at the different types of tipping points. Some for manufacturers may be when they are no longer going to put any R&D money into internal combustion engines. For suppliers, it's when their manufacturers may not ask them for any more parts or R&D on ICE engines. For consumers, it may be when the price parity occurs, and some of our speakers are going to be talking about that. We're going to have our people presenting, and then we'll have Q&As after each person. I'm going to start with some intro about my group, the Automotive Futures Group. So our group gets our funding from our affiliate program and our supporting members. We want to thank in advance all our affiliates, because without them, we could not be doing what we're doing. They support all of our, not all of our research, but most of our research, but also our conferences. Our focus on our research has to do with globalization of the automotive industry, as well as advanced powertrains and intelligent transportation systems. Also, we have 5 conferences that we're doing on an annual basis. Our next conference is in September, looking at the future of automotive IT. And here we're looking at the Internet of Things in the automotive industry. And then also we'll be, in November, we'll be looking at the Chinese automotive industry. And in February, probably something to do with new mobility. We like to leave some flexibility depending on what are the major issues that are going on during the year. These are a list of our affiliate members. Again, we'd like to thank them in advance for all the help and support they give us in terms of talking to them about what's going on in the industry, as well as financial support. We have a lot of research partners that take part in our research: IT organizations, manufacturers, government NGOs, as well as suppliers and consulting companies. Our projects for the 2020, we're focusing on our powertrain strategies for the 21st century that we'll be looking at some of the results right after I get done with this intro. We're also looking at the China new energy vehicle story about what's going on in China. We've been following it for about 3 or 4 years now, tracking sales and government support policies, as well as platform strategies. One of my colleagues, Sergio Munez, is going to talk tomorrow about some of our research in that area. And we're also looking at the effects of autonomous vehicles on the economy, society, and the individual. So we're looking at research questions around mobility. Where are the manufacturers heading in mobility? What are the public-private partnerships? Powertrains as tipping points for EVs. We're looking at that today. Also for powertrains, the dealership network. Are they ready for EV sales and service? And also the issue of whether OEMs are transitioning to hybrids, or are they going to be just developing more advanced ICE vehicles over the next 5 to 10 years. In terms of globalization, how long will it take for manufacturers and suppliers to reconfigure their supply chains to meet the new NAFTA and USMCA regulations? That's a big issue. And how much influence will China and the EU have on the acceleration of EV sales in the US. The group that we're working with is made up primarily of students, but we also have one researcher, Kara Alkire is our research associate. She's been working with us since the 90s, so she's very familiar about the work that we're doing. But we also have students working with us, and some of them have been working with us for a couple of years now. Wei Chen Li is working on the Automotive Futures conferences. Rishi Chen is working on the Chinese NEV project. Minori Suzuki is working on a battery suppliers project that we're just starting. Aaron Dahl, who's just graduated, has been working on the U of M Automotive Industry Student Survey. Daniel Nemmert and Edric Joe. Edric is our intern for the summer from the undergraduate research opportunity program that the U of M provides for young researchers to get some ideas about what's going on and what research is at the university level. And Daniel's he's been working on, along with Edric, on the powertrain strategies for 21st century. And Alex Balt has been working with us on the student survey and also and working on a Power BI implementation for us for our website. And finally, our student marketing intern, Lahari Vavilala, is from the U of M Ross Business School. She's been working with us this summer. You might be hearing from us marketing-wise this summer. And this is where she's been working. She's been working on developing our LinkedIn page. The Automotive Futures Group LinkedIn page. We ask you to follow us, connect and follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be reaching out to you over the next couple of months as well. As I said, upcoming conference, Automotive IT in September, China in November. One of the things that we're doing a Meet the Speakers networking session for right after this conference. 3 of the 4 speakers will be staying for a half an hour extra, and we have some spots that are open for, they'll do 2 meetings per speaker, 15 minutes each. The sign-up sheet I sent to all the registered people within, I think, last night. Affiliates have been getting first chance at it. I've been sending that out to them. So if you want to, sign up for that link. We've sent the link to you. Sign up if you want to meet with the speakers today. So for our schedule today, I'm going to do an intro for the Powertrain Strategy Survey. Jiangwan Shen from LG Economic Research Institute is going to be talking about his work on electric vehicles. We'll do a Q&A with him. Xavier Muskay, who's the Managing Director and Senior Partner, Boston Consulting Group, is going to talk about a recent report that they have done on tipping points for EVs. We'll take a break after his Q&A. Michael Sefuten from Environmental Protection Agency here in Ann Arbor is going to be speaking about what the EPA is doing in terms of research related to EVs and tipping points for EVs as well. And Karine Hamza and Ken Laberto is from the Toyota Research Institute in North America, here in our R&D here in Ann Arbor as well. They're going to be talking about some of their recent research on tipping points for EVs and the in particular price parity. And then we'll adjourn around 12:15, and then we'll go for the people who signed up for Meet the Speakers. We'll start probably around 12:25. Attendees will get a link to the presentations and to the video. We should have that ready by this weekend. Affiliates get all that, but they also get a conference summary, and that we'll be working on over the next few days. In terms of housekeeping, the agenda, speaker bios, registration lists, sponsorship opportunities, affiliate information, upcoming events, all that is on our website. I sent you the link to that just a little bit ago and also yesterday. And finally, the audience questions and the conference review. There, as I sent you in the email, there are Google Forms for you to fill in questions for the speakers that will take and ask them during their Q&As, and also within that link that I sent you, there's a conference review. So we appreciate if you would give us your opinion about that as well. So as I said, the links to the presentations and the videos will be emailed this weekend. And then I want to dive in a little bit into our Powertrain Strategy Survey and some of the results from that. This is a survey that we did with Ward's Intelligence. I want to thank them for their help. And as I said, Edric Joe and Daniel Memmer from both research assistant students at the U of M have been working on the survey. Daniel for almost 9 months now, and Edric during this summertime. You've seen the information about our affiliates. Again, thank them. They're sponsoring this research as well. So we're looking at powertrain experts. We've asked them in a survey format, auto manufacturers, suppliers, government, NGOs, academia, and consulting. We asked for projections for 2025 and 2030. This follows similar surveys that we've done over the last 10 years or more. And the surveys were completed during May and June of this year. We had about 110 respondents, 23% manufacturers, 35% suppliers, and this time more than usual, 42% of the other group. One of the things that we provide for our affiliates is the analyses that looks at the differences among these groups. We'll give this information, some of this information today, but all the other stuff will come out to the affiliates. For titles of 20% CEO and and we got 20% CEOs, engineers, chief technology officers and directors, 27%, and managers, 23%, engineers, technicians, 14%, and researchers and scientists at 16%. Powertrains, as I said, for passenger cars, they're expecting, this is very similar to what we received last year, a pretty big drop in 2030, but 65% these are all pretty big drops for spark ignited engines. Right now, we're probably in the 90s, high 90%, mid 90% on spark ignited engines. When you look to hybrids, we're looking at, and this is where the differences are going to, where the experts think is going to occur, where hybrids are going to take over. But remember, for every hybrid, there's a spark ignited engine. So when you combine both of the spark ignited and hybrid vehicles, you still have spark ignited engines. And sometimes it looks like 80 to 90% again. But that's still, even if you got into the 80s, it'd be 10% less. Where is that going? It looks like it's going to electrics. Whether they'll be able to do that in this quickly between now and 2025 and also 2030, these are some of the things we're going to be talking about over the next few hours. And when you looked at light trucks, the differences between passenger cars and light trucks, still more spark ignited engines, fewer hybrids, but still significant numbers of hybrids compared to where we are today, and some electrics, and again, advanced diesels. So they're seeing some pretty good diesel applications for light trucks. So when we asked some of the issues about that they made comments about related to powertrains, and these are some of the quotes that came out of the comments. Everything depends heavily on emission regulations, fossil fuel prices, and technological breakthrough in battery, energy storage, and technology. These are quite unpredictable. The COVID-19 crisis will most likely disrupt the mega trend of people wanting to live in the city, and this will lead to a more private car truck ownership. We'll see about that one. Price of fuel is such a predominant factor. Recent developments, fracking, will keep oil very competitive for the foreseeable future. So we also looked at some issues related to corporate average fuel economy and emissions. We asked the experts what they thought whether the new CAFE regulations would reduce vehicle prices by $1,000 as the administration said they would. They think this is pretty unlikely. We asked them if they believe the new CAFE regulations will survive the current legal battle. And it's a little, they think it's somewhat likely to likely. There's some unlikelies there, of course. So there's a little uncertainty there, but it's tilting a little towards the likely thing. So it's going to be a battle, and we'll be talking about some of that tomorrow with Michael McCarthy from the California Air Resources Board. We asked the experts if they expect to see fuel economy increase from 2020 to 2026. This question was based on the 1.5% improvements that the manufacturers had to make between now and 2025, compared to the 5% per year that they had to do for under the previous administration. So when they average out about 12%, but we looked at the quartile distribution. There's a pretty big spread here about how the manufacturers are going to respond in terms of increasing fuel economy. And here we're talking about the overall fuel economy for the whole U.S. fleet of new vehicles, not individual companies. But this is all the individual companies combined, and how they're seeing that. So they're expecting, some manufacturers said they're going to continue to meet the goals that were set by the Obama administration, which would put them around the 16 to 25% range. So that's one of the things that we see some uncertainty there about how that's going to play out. We did this question already, and we did these questions already. And experts believe most manufacturers will meet CAFE without credits in the 2025 timeframe, but the 39% will say we're going to need credits, and a few won't be able to meet it. In the short term, experts believe manufacturers will develop new ICE technology over hybrid technology to improve fuel economy. See, this is the big issue that we just had the experts tell us that there were many more hybrids coming in the next 5 to 10 years. But one of the things, if you only need to do a 1.5% improvement, you probably may just go with improving ICE vehicles rather than introducing hybrid technology or even EVs. Some of the ICE advancements they still expect some HCCI, some downsizing, increased compression ratios, skip fire technology, cylinder deactivation, variable compression and valve timing, turbocharging, and electric turbocharging. These are things that have been worked on for the last few years, and it looks like they're expecting more of that, and improvements of those probably. Some of the EV challenges that we're looking at, looking for tipping points for manufacturers. For them, it was vehicle price, vehicle range, customer satisfaction, and charging infrastructure. Vehicle market share, not so much. One of the other things they mentioned was charging time. Now, this is something that we probably should have put in every survey. You make mistakes, and this is probably one of the ones that we made for this one. We probably should have had charging time as one of the things for them to choose. And so they were rating each one of these, and also government regulations, fuel prices, and supply chain stability. For customers, vehicle price is, again, the big deal. Again, these are not surveys of consumers. These are experts talking about customers. So it's vehicle price, then range, then infrastructure, then customer satisfaction, and less so for the amount of EVs available for purchase, we always thought that this might be a bigger issue in terms of the different types and numbers of EVs and the amount of EVs on the road that would be have an influence on people buying in terms of a tipping point. Charging time, battery lifetime, always big issues, as well as EVs and SUV category, and the and better styling. When we look at, asked when lithium-ion batteries would reach $100 per kilowatt hour, they were not expecting this happening until after 2026. Some people are talking about this happening before then. As you can see, there's a certain percentage that think this is going to happen before then, but most people are going to think it's going to happen after that. And a few people say it's never going to happen. When we asked them when we thought, in terms of price parity, that EVs vehicles that were comparable to ICE vehicles would be at a comparable price to those vehicles. Overall, they were the average was 2033 by then. Here we break out by manufacturers. They're around 2034, suppliers about 2031, and everyone else about 2033. So from our sample, they're expecting they're not expecting ICE EVs to be comparable to ICE vehicles in price parity for another 10 years or so. In terms of life expectancy, of the typical life expectancy of an ICE vehicle today is about 12 years. For 2025, they expect EV life expectancy to be 10 years and 13 years for 2030. These are similar to what results that we received last year. And we looked at the types of batteries that would be coming out over the next 2025, 2030 timeframe. Lithium ion is the clear leader here. In the past, we thought some solid state batteries would be coming out, but it's not showing up here. In terms of the some of the issues driving this, hold on for 1 second here. Here we go. The experts really don't have any consensus about the biggest obstacle to improve electric motors. Again, part of the EV story. Rare earth minerals, motors are almost perfect now, making it hard to make improvements. R&D focused on other systems, cost of improvements, especially if things are almost perfect, and not putting a lot of money into R&D right now, how they're thinking about this. Okay. Increasing the system efficiency is rated as the most important factor in developing electric motors. But they also say reducing rare earth metals and reducing cost. So those are but they were not rating each one of these. They were just saying which one was the most important factor, as the prior one was also what is the most important factor. Okay. And also we asked, one of the things about charging we did ask, which we didn't ask in one of the other previous question, was one of the big issues is how long does it take to recharge a vehicle? So we asked them to predict when EVs would be able to charge a completely discharged battery in 15 minutes. Well, they say it's going to be well over a decade. Manufacturers are even less optimistic. They're looking at 2037 compared to suppliers, and the other group is at 2035. So here we're looking at almost 15 years before we get to the type of charging that's similar to the type of thing that we're doing when we're refilling our gasoline vehicles. And this is a big challenge for them. In the last couple of questions we looked at COVID-19. We asked if we thought COVID-19 would delay EVs, and the largest group was that it was likely to, and this is the majority of people think it is going to delay them. EVs. We asked them by how much. Oh, it's going to be between 6 months to 2 years, maybe 6 months to a year, but actually definitely within the 6 months to a year time frame, probably depending on the manufacturer. And some of the other effects that they thought the COVID-19 will have on the auto industry would have the localization of supply chain, the shift to online retailing, multiple manufacturing locations worldwide making the same product, and some more virtual business meetings as we're having right now. Okay, so these are the results that we have from our powertrain strategy survey that we did over the last couple of months. In terms of tipping points, I wanted to use this as kind of a setup for how our rest of our speakers are going to be talking about EVs and how they're going to fit into the future of the automotive industry, and what are we kind of know what are the big challenges, but the issue will be how are those going to play out, and how are the manufacturers and suppliers going to make the changes that are necessary. Let's go to our first speaker, is Jianguan Xin from LG Economic Research. Jianguan, it covers the rechargeable battery industry, energy material industry, and the electric vehicle powertrain industry. He has nearly 20 years experience in the automotive powertrain and transportation system industries, and his previous positions included marketing leader for the battery division of LG Chem and a researcher at the IT Research Center of Samsung Electronics. Jianguan, welcome, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, my name is Jianguan Xin, and in Korea, I think I'm only one who works at night. So I'm a research fellow at LG ERI, and the role of my organization is the first role is just economic things, and the second role is setting a long-term strategy for core business in LG as well as Korea. I'm involved in strategy department, and I have involved in this battery industry since 2004 at LG. I'm very honored to be here, and actually I was in Annaba 4 years ago. I worked with Bruce and presented about the future powertrain technology. I'm happy to be here again, and I hope to go back Annaba soon. Okay, the first slide is the characteristic of the first generation EV. And EV generation definition is varies from institution to institution. And here's my opinion about EV generation. The first generation is from year 2010, and you can see the Nissan Leaf or some other vehicle. And the second generation is year 2015, and third generation is from last year. And each generation has a very specific characteristic. For example, the first generation is focused on product maturity, and it's also focused on A seg or B seg. And then the second generation is focused on cell energy density, and they also focused on how they can increase the mileage. And the third generation is EV for mass market, so it's also focused on the price competitiveness without subsidy. So we think, although the Bruce just explained that the EV, the price competitiveness with ICE can be maybe more than 10 years later, but we think the first generation EV, which can be in the market maybe 3 to 5 years later, will be priced down almost the same to internal combustion engine. And so that we think that the first generation EV should focus on differentiation factor point of EV. For example, the design or infotainment or safety. The next slide is the competition with ICE. So McKinsey and BNEF maybe, so last year, they released some report about some price, and they say that the EV price is almost the same after 5 years later. And BNEF also the same opinion, and we, LG, also have almost a similar opinion. So we think the differentiation factor of ICE can be excellent driving performance. So we assume that the first generation EV can be, the price is almost similar with the ICE. So this EV should focus on some differentiation factor. First one is the excellent driving performance, and second one is easy integration with the new technology, and the third one can be suitable in terms of sustainability, including the eco-friendly production. So I think that the real competition without government support in automotive industry will begin around the year 2025. And this slide, it says our assumption about combination with EV and new technology. Maybe it's everybody mentioned about the autonomous technology and mobility or connectivity or something like this. And our opinion is that EV with autonomous technology, it can be available after year 2025, but EV for car sharing can be big impact for EV demand. But however, because of the virus issue, shared vehicle industry may need time to on-track growth, but I believe that sharing is kind of a trend and which cannot be irreversible. So I think the sharing EV will driving high demand by mobility company. And the sharing car is like we can see there's a Volkswagen like Moia is kind of a concept car and the street scooter in Germany. It's kind of some light electric vehicle truck, and its cost is not that expensive if you compare with the IC car. And we think the EV for sharing car is first in the market in the commercial vehicle sector, because although the fuel cost is decreasing, but the more than driving mileage and then more the driver, they can feel the more benefit about the fuel, the decrease issue. And the next page is about the second life EV. And this is very interesting point. And we think it's maybe around the year 2025, almost 60 gigawatt hour used battery will be in the market. It's huge, and maybe huge used electric vehicle market will be formed year 2025, and we assume that the global used battery market size will be almost $8 billion in year 2025. So already major countries like in China or some European company, they are strengthening point on used battery. So perspective of LCA called this life cycle assessment is also very important. So a lot of the battery company or a lot of the electric vehicle OEM, they are already focused on battery disposal after use. The first one is recycling, and the second one is reuse, and the third one is second use. The recycling is a very familiar concept, but we think the reuse as an EV battery is depending on the remaining life. And the second use means after repurposing battery used for other purpose, such as ESS or home energy storage. For example, and in LG, we think probably after the 8 years EV usage, and we evaluate how much life is still remaining in battery, and we think it's almost 80 or 90% of the battery is still valid after 8 or 9 years. So we think although the life of the battery is still very high, but currently only recycling is only valid solution for this industry. So LG or some other company in Asia, they looking for another business model about the reuse or second use or something like this. And EU and China, they already enacted some guidelines on battery containing certain hazardous substance. And next slide is the policy. And we think it's the four policies after year 2020 we expected. The first one is everybody pretty very familiar about this concept is the tightening CO2. And the second one is EV subsidy reduction. Major country already tended to adjust and reduce subsidy. And the third one is eco-friendliness. And the last one is enhance safety while driving. This is very interesting concept because it's until now or until first or second or third generation EV, the lithium-ion battery safety guideline is very severe. And some guideline is almost similar from the IT battery guideline and electric vehicle guideline. And so some OEM, they try to adjust the safety guideline, such as the nail test or some other the crash test or something like this. And also some OEM or some government, they try to focus on safety while driving, just a normal driving situation. For example, just normal driving situation, or for example, they just park in the garage or something like this. Oh, sorry. And also the very interesting regulation called is GTR 20 is that a request of the duration of the 5 minutes between the warning of summer runway and safe escape of passenger. That means is that when something happened in the car during the in driving in the highway or something like this, and the driver feel that there's some gas inside of the vehicle, and then indeed maybe 5 minutes the driver should escape from the car. And some European OEM, they urge that this minute should be increased up to 30 minutes, and but the 5 minutes is in China's regulation. And this slide is actually it's very important to find out the driver pain point. And for the R&D direction of the first generation EV, so we think the mileage and safety and price, quick charging and resale value are major pain point. And the driving mileage is interesting. This is more than 50% of the customers still prefer 300 miles or more, because the EV maybe around year 2025 can be the driver's first car, and they usually have only one or two cars. So they think their car should have more than 300 miles or more. And second one is a safety concern about the explosion of the batteries. And this survey is done by the usual driver. And the third one is not willing to pay extra for EV compared to ICE. That is the big issue to OEM in global OEM, because they know about its result. And LG, we also surveyed this kind of question from this year, and almost all OEM answered our question. There is customer, they do not willing to pay extra for EV compared to ICE. And the first one is the quick charging. So this point is only one, the premium for EV. So it's a quick charging. So more than half of the user require our charging time is 30 minutes or less. But I don't think there's the driver, they do not need just 15 or 10 minutes of charging time, because they know it's the electric vehicle car, not the ICE car. And the last one is the resale value. See, uncertain about remaining lifetime battery is a major cause of the discount price. So they high need for lower EV price and the driving safety and the quicker charging to ICE fuel time, and need for battery life prediction and management tech. Because the resale value, baby, I just saw that the Bruce survey, there's usually ICE lifetime can be 12 years, right? And we think the EV lifetime should be almost the same or more than ICE lifetime. But currently, the EV battery warranty is maybe 8 years, or 8 years was maybe up to 10 years. That means after 10 years, the driver should change their battery, or the lifetime of the EV can be shortened than ICE. That means it's a decrease of the resale value, and that means it's the driver or purchaser, they probably hesitate to buy electric vehicle. And this is the last slide of the first part of my presentation, and it's the OEM's pain point. The OEM's pain point is OEMs still have question about the demand. EV demand is highly dependent on policy and lack of confidence in driving safety or the durability. And the second one is the deficit. Still, there is no profitable EV OEM yet. And higher regulatory policy will lead to greater penalty for non-compliance. But from last year, Tesla, they say they start to earning money, and from this year, Luno told that they start to earning money, but their profit ratio is very, very marginal, we think. And the third one is the inferior user value. The expanding EV is essential for OEM because they should respond to regulatory policy. But value of the user point of view is still lower than ICE. That is their point. For example, when we asked about the driver, and they say, although the OEM marketing point is some electric vehicle can drive maybe more than 300 miles, but driver have some question that, okay, but this driving range is only valid on very standard situation. For example, in the winter time or in the summertime, the driving range can be decreased. That is the question about the EV driving range. So OEMs still have some question about this, that there is the impaired user value in EV. So we think the OEM's the focal point in fourth generation EV is the first one is the driving performance. For example, we think the distance is still getting better and better. So we think it's more than 300 miles or average 300 miles is okay, but it's the convenience factor and also safety is very important. For example, the shorter charging time and enhanced driving safety to secure safety is very important. And the second one is non-driving performance is diversifying user value. That means it's efficiency improvement or high interest diverse usability of EV. That means EV can be used home energy storage system or response to increased energy consumption due to autonomous driving or increased network connectivity. That means it's when autonomous driving or network connectivity is increased a lot inside of the vehicle, that means it's more power source is needed inside of the vehicle. That means electric vehicle may need additional battery source or the increasing battery pack size. Okay, and this is my second part, and impact on the EV battery industry. What is the impact of the EV battery industry when we assume the fourth generation EV characteristic? And when you see the left the table, we see that the vehicle battery characteristic. The first generation pain point can be requirement battery for second generation. For example, the first generation, the pain point can be low mileage. The requirement for battery in second generation is energy density. And the second generation is a price burden. So it's the third generation, they focused on cost and supply management. So, but third generation EV pain point is still, we cannot expect it yet because it's launched just last year or from this year. We should assume, and we assumed this, and the first one is the profitability, and the second one is safety, and third one is user convenience, and last one is regulation. So we think the fourth generation electric vehicle battery should meet all four pain points because it's the major spec of the first generation EV battery is likely to solve the pain point of third generation EV. And this is our analysis, and maybe third generation and fourth generation battery spec. And we can divide the battery spec is the current battery spec and also new battery spec. Current battery specification means is that there is any change, current battery specification. And the new battery specification is kind of a new battery specification can be appear in fourth generation EV. And so almost all OEM, they just focused on price and price and price because they think the EV price should be comparable with the ICE. So price is important in second, it's just a typo, and third to fourth generation, it should be increased. And capacity and energy density, they still have some needs, but not strong needs like the price. So they want to improve a little more. And life is, they think it's battery life is already okay. The cycle life or calendar life is okay. Because currently the battery cycle life is 800 cycle life, and maybe in the short term, this cycle life can be increased to maybe almost 1,000 cycle life. That means if your electric vehicle can drive maybe 300 miles, that means it's 300 miles times 1,000 means 300,000 miles for only one battery without switching. And the first one is power or resistance. It's almost the same, maybe it's maintained current level, but the quick charging. Quick charging is the OEM or the purchaser or driver, they think is they want to, they need more shorter quick charging time. And the extent on safety on extent is they think there is current standard, they mitigating trend from current standard. So we think that the quick charging for first generation battery is just only one important spec in first generation EV beyond the price. Because there's a lot of the battery company or a lot of the electric vehicle company, they still focus on increase the energy density and increase the battery life. But when we surveyed or when we meet the OEM and when you meet the driver, they think the current driving range in third generation EV and their lifetime and their power characteristic is okay. They only needed the more cheaper electric vehicle and the more shorter charging time, and they want to assure the safety on extended situation or safety on normal situation. And this is the last slide of my presentation. And besides the current spec of EV battery, I think the new battery spec for electric vehicle battery will emerge. In the left side, there's the market trend. In the demand side, the first one is change in consumer trend, and the second one is autonomous driving or infotainment. Although autonomous driving can be in the market maybe in the long-term standpoint. And the third one is increasing mobility service and expanding used EV market and increasing awareness for environment. And the supply side means is supply side is the first one is the tightening regulation and tightening sustainability regulation of EV production and use of battery disposal and recycling and the increased need for EV safety. So we think the first new spec can be operational safety. So it's enhanced safety in normal situation. For example, the delayed summer runaway or something like this. That's the operational safety. And the second one is battery life control or management. Battery life itself is okay, but it's OEM or driver, they want to know how many life or how much life is still remain in my battery. That's why, because they want to evaluate their resale value. So battery life control or battery management technology can be very important technology in the future. And third one is the battery optimization for non-driving performance. Maybe autonomous driving or connectivity or something like this. Additional power source is needed for electric vehicle. So it's battery optimization may need for non-driving performance, not driving performance, just for non-driving performance. And the support for second life battery is very important because the battery itself, it lives very long, maybe more than 10 years. And for example, battery itself, if you just store in the inventory house, and then after 10 years, battery itself its performance can be more than 80 or 90%. So support for second life battery is very important. So new business model for battery usage and extending the scope of the sustainability, especially for European OEM. And some European OEM, they very focused on the support for second life battery. This is the final page of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jang-Wan. Got a few questions for you.
Okay.
This issue of the second life of the battery versus the recycling of the battery?
Okay.
Is there a trade-off about what the advantages of just recycling it versus second life?
Actually, the recycling is very easy. When you get some used battery, you just recycle. You just melt it down and just extract some raw material. It's very easy. But the reason why the reuse battery is not happen in this day is we cannot expect how many life is still remaining. We should expect very correctly. So lifetime battery life control or battery life forecast technology is very hot technology in this industry. So if we get them, for example, when you get some used battery and you can expect just correctly how many just you have maybe 80% life is still remain, and then you can find the usage of the battery. But without without this technology, you cannot expect how many life is still remain in your battery, and then you just recycle it. So we think there is no trade-off. Our assumption is the first time life in the electric vehicle and the second life in battery can be used in ESS or some home energy storage or some electric motorcycle or electric bicycle. And then this battery can be recycled maybe after 10 or 15 years later.
Very good.
Okay.
Can you stop sharing your screen?
Okay, yes.
Okay. I want to bring our other speakers in to see if they want to jump in on any of these questions. One of the things that we try to do is have all the speakers available if they want to participate in any of the questions. A lot of the questions are very specific to the battery supplier of the world, one of the battery suppliers of the world. I guess, Jang-Wan, one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you about was a solid state battery. It's something that we talked about in the past as something that was going to be a bigger deal within this decade. Where do you see it happening now?
The reason why the solid battery is famous in the past, I mean, the first one is the safety. we think the solid state battery should be very safer. And the second one is energy density or something like this. When you take the solid state battery and then driving range is increasing maybe almost 1,000 kilometers or something like that. And third one is the charging time. So we expect that charging time can be shortened if we apply the solid state battery. But this kind of assumption, we figure out, actually not LG, but a lot of battery company, they figure out some issue. For example, some solid battery is not that safer. And some solid battery is ionic conductivity, there's some problem. That means its charging times can be not that shorter. And also the driving range, although the solid state battery driving ranges can be increased, but lithium-ion batteries energy density is also increased a lot. So using the current technology in lithium-ion battery, you can expect maybe almost 500 kilometer or 500, more than 500 kilometer per one charge. That means they don't need this more than, why the driver needs more than 1,000 kilometer driving range, only one charging. So we think that, and the last point is the price. Okay, there is lithium-ion battery, the price is decreasing very fast, very, very fast. But if we apply the solid-state battery, and there's some issue in price, that means we think that maybe after 5 or 10 years later, and we can figure out, we can find out some solid-state battery for electric vehicle, but this battery solution is valid only for very premium segment in electric vehicle.
Anybody want to jump in on this question?
I'd actually like to go to the previous question and say that I strongly concur that the lack of ability to know precisely what lifetime is left in the battery has made it much, much harder to develop a used marketplace for the same asset. So I, being a car guy, dubbed this problem about 10 years ago as a lack of a battery odometer.
Okay.
And the concept of a battery odometer is this, odometers do not precisely tell the prospective buyer how much life there is in a car. It simply is something that is highly correlated through lots and lots of observations to the value of the car. But it doesn't tell you if the brakes are about to go out. It doesn't tell you if the first owner didn't change the oil for 20,000 miles. It doesn't tell you lots of really important information about the lifetime of the car, but it still provides enough indication of the likely life of the car that it allows a entire used marketplace for cars. And without that, I mean, imagine if I was trying to sell you a used car and there was no odometer information and there was no information about how the car had been used. How would we even start that negotiation? In the same way, if I were to bring a used Prius battery and set it on your desk and say, would you like to buy this? And if you said yes, how would we even start the discussion about the value or the remaining value? So I'm unfortunately not a battery chemist. I don't have much to offer as to what should be in that odometer. I mean, obviously, C rate and depths of discharge and how many of them and all those things would be candidates. But I would just once again say that without some kind of health meter or odometer or something like that, even if it's highly imperfect, the used marketplace for batteries is really challenged.
Yes, right.
Very good. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, just a quick short comment. Actually, in LG, we are in this industry almost 20 years, and we know this is very difficult technology. But we think is the reason why this is very difficult technology is because we need the data, right? But LG, we have the research data and manufacturing data of the battery, but we do not get some driving profile or usage data. But all three battery data is combined. It's research and manufacturing and it's driving profile data. And then we can expect very precisely to how many rifles remain. But we only have the research and manufacturing data. But our R&D guys say their accuracy level is maybe almost 80 or 85%. But this data is, if we combine it with the driving profile, and then this accuracy level is maybe up to 95%. And actually, it's LG, our target is we get this technology until next year, and we have a lot of the partnership with some OEM. And I don't think that you can see in the odometer and how many rifles still remain, but some battery guy or some service guy can't expect how many rifles still remain after 5 years from now. Okay.
And my point is simply, if that was an exposed feature, even if the consumers don't understand what goes into that, as long as it seems to be relatively consistent and predictive, that allows for a secondhand marketplace.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, too, sorry to talk so long during this other session, but this is also a big barrier for full V2G, where a car would release energy out of its batteries. And I'm not saying it's the biggest issue or the only issue or any of that, but if you can't go to a chief engineer and say, these extra cycles that you're putting on the battery will reduce the life of the car or the life of the battery by exactly this, such that you can put a price tag on that, you're in the situation where you may know what the value of providing that utility service, but you don't know what it's costing you because you can't precisely state what the value of the battery / car is reduced with any given extra cycle.
Very good. Thanks, Ken. I think we're going to move on. Jang Wan, I want to thank you for your time. We're going to let you go to sleep now. And
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for spending the time with us.
Yes.
Take care.
Take care.
Our next speaker is Xavier Muskay. Xavier is the senior partner and managing director of the Boston Consulting Group, which he joined in 1985 in London. He's the founder of BCG's Detroit office and 8-year leader of BCG's global automotive practice. His recent work focuses on a report with French President Macron on the future of the auto industry and mobility, the launch of a European battery initiative, market forecasts for powertrain evolution, due diligence of battery pack technology, and opportunities in power electronics and components for EVs. So he has some experience with EVs. So he's going to tell us about a recent report that they've been doing on tipping points for EVs. And Xavier, thank you for joining us.
Well, Bruce, thanks for this nice introduction. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Great. So let me share my screen.
You see the thing down at the bottom of the screen, the,
Yeah, but it's hiding. Sorry, it's just hidden for me. Just wait a
okay.
second. I don't have the right. I don't know why it's not showing.
Yeah, I can see it from here.
Yeah,
It's getting blocked by the Zoom stuff.
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So let me just
Go up to the
get it back.
slideshow at the top, or is that blocked as well?
Control are there, but they're not showing. That's interesting. So why are they not showing? Maybe it's here. Okay. Huh. Interesting.
And right up the top of that is the view, or the slideshow is to the little left of that.
Yeah, but it's not.
There you go. That one. Try that one.
Here we are.
All right, magic.
Great. Okay. We're good?
We're good.
Okay, excellent. Great. Okay, great. So yes, I'm going to talk about the tipping point, and as you said, it's been a while actually since we've been looking at the space. Basically starting in 2009, where we were at that time, reasonably pessimistic about the next 10 years on EVs. In 2010, we looked specifically at battery performances, battery choices, and the evolution of the cost. We did forecast some significant reduction of the cost of those batteries going forward, but still not enough to make a market. Let's say between 2020 and between 2010 and 2020. And in 2017, we actually for the first time used the word tipping point, basically saying, it's not yet there, but we now see light, out of the tunnel. And we know that in the coming years, there will be actually a time where there will be a sustainable market for EVs. And basically, we said somewhere between 2023 and 2025. And in 2020, and that's what I'm going to share with you, we actually revised several of the assumptions of our 2017 report, with frankly a few good news. And so I'm going to share some of those as we speak. First of all, and that's the most important, we had already seen between 2010 and 2017 a faster decline in battery cost than we had modeled in 2010. And so roughly, we were, 30 to 40% cheaper in battery cost in 2017. And interestingly, the same thing has happened between 2017 and 2019. In just 2 years, battery costs, have declined faster than we had anticipated in 2017. And I'll show exactly some, precise figures. I think, it was just mentioned, a few minutes before that actually the regulations also are tightening, further in many markets. That's partly true, of course, in Europe. And there's also now, growing competition among OEs. Some of that obviously has been, fueled by some of Tesla's successes. So the model we have is basically built on two things. At the bottom is built on the regulatory compliance, which is, what is the mix of powertrains that various OEs, have to put on the market to be compliant. And we know this is the minimum share of electrification that's required, because otherwise the OEs, in particular in Europe, will pay significant fines. And then there's another model, which is, consumer driven. What is the TCO, the total cost of ownership of a car with different powertrains, an ICE, a diesel, a plug-in hybrid, an EV? And if you're a customer at a given point in time, what is the reasonable choice for you to make, given how much you're ready to invest right now to pay back in fuel costs, knowing that electricity is cheaper than gasoline at the pump? And if you're a consumer and you make rational decisions, there's a point where, if the TCO is good enough for EVs, you're going to start buying more EVs and less ICEs, and we'll see a bit that evolution there. So what's clear is in the past several years, the share of electrified vehicles with it, mild hybrid, full hybrid, plugins and EVs has increased in the marketplace. And if we look just at the 2016 to 2019 period, you've seen growth of the electrified engines, somewhere between 25 and 30% year on year, which is obviously much higher than the overall growth of the automotive industry. So we've seen actually a reduction of the share of pure, ICE engines. A lot of that, to tell the truth, has been actually supported by incentives. And the question is, do we still need incentives, and for how long? And once incentives disappear, is there a real market? And the good news that I was sharing is actually the faster cost of decline of batteries, that has happened in the past 10 years, and that's continuing right now. If you look at the gray curve on the top and sort of the green orange curve in the middle here, you have our base case scenario that we had forecasted in 2017, and our more aggressive case, which is the light green in the middle. And if you look at 2030, our base case was $126 per kilowatt hour in 2030 as a base case at the pack level, and our most optimistic assumption was 95. And the reality is that we've seen, between 2017 and now, an evolution that's much closer to our more aggressive case. And therefore, in this revised forecast, we've actually used that assumption with a target of $100 per kilowatt hour in 2030 and a midpoint at 120. 126 was roughly, consistent with what the administration, Argonne Labs, and a number of places at the time was forecasting, but actually things have gone faster. You still have here, just as a reference, the highest or the more aggressive projection that was made by Bloomberg, suggesting that potentially we could get as low as $62 per kilowatt hour in 2030. We don't think this is likely to happen, but it's important to know that there are much more aggressive forecasts out there that are potentially credible. Now, the 100 we think in 2030 is very credible, and if I had to make sort of a bit of a caveat here, is we think it's a good target. It could happen slightly earlier than 2030, and obviously that would be an even better news. So that's what's driving actually the improvement of TCO seen from the consumer. And the result of that is, if you start doing the calculation every year about I'm a customer, I'm looking forward at the cost of buying an EV and how much fuel I save with electricity compared to gasoline, what is my best choice economically? And what's interesting is you have on the next page for 3 geographies, the US, China, and Japan. What you have in green, which is nearly a horizontal line, is the cost of ICE at every of these years. And the dark line is the cost of an EV as a TCO based on 5-year TCO. So the cost of the car and the cost of the fuel, the electricity over 5 years. And interestingly, if you look at a medium car in the US, in 2022, without incentives, you're looking at an EV and you're saying, you know what, it's exactly the same TCO as an ICE engine. And therefore, it's a good economic choice for me. And if I'm inclined to like EVs, and economically, I'm going to buy one. The same year actually happens for China. And Japan actually is further there, probably closer to 2025. And one of the big drivers here is the number of miles that you drive every year. And in Japan, people drive less. So actually, it's more expensive relatively to buy an EV in Japan than it is in the US, where people recover the cost of the EV faster. So obviously, different cars have different TCO line, but believing that in the US, somewhere between 2022 and 2024, there will be a point where you're better off buying an EV economically than buying an IC as a consumer. If you're ready to invest a little more, I think this is the reasonable time frame to think about, which means that somewhere around 2022, 2023, we won't need incentives, and this will be a fully sustainable market. Based on that, we've in a way made, and this is updated, unfortunately for the 2020, COVID crisis. So this is very much the latest figure. But if we see the trend overall, independently of COVID, the projections to 2025 and 2030 remains pretty steady. And in 2030, we think there will be 18% full BEVs sold every year, and 8% plug-in hybrid, which may be a bit of a transition technology, because as batteries get cheaper, you probably want to go more BEV than you go PHEV. And overall, what this means is in 2030 there will be more globally, more cars that are electrified than cars that have a combustion engine only, and we're at 52% electrified vehicle in 2030. And what you have to the right here is the growth rates of those different categories, where you're seeing that obviously if you're a BEV manufacturer, you're going to be growing about at 20 to 30% per annum, and if you're a gasoline engine company only, you'd be declining at -1 to -4% in general year on year between now and 2030. So we talked a little in the prior presentation, about how does oil prices, battery cost, and so on impact those models. And I would say yes, there's a number of factors that do impact how important will be the market for BEV. If I look at the right-hand column, but frankly, these are limited sensitivities. It doesn't totally change the trajectory. Yes, if oil prices go from $60 to $90, 60 was our base assumption for this model, BEV share you can grow by 2 to 3%. Yes, if oil prices remain depleted at $40 instead of $60, you lose a bit of BEV, but it is not a major factor. There's still significant incentive to buy a BEV, post 2022, 2023. Battery cost, if they were not 100 in our forecast, but if they were the $60 roughly that Bloomberg is forecasting, that does increases the share of BEVs by 3 to 4%. But still, I mean, it doesn't totally change the orders of magnitude. Rideshare adoption, I think Yijang was mentioning also how shared mobility improves the share of electrification, because higher miles cars benefit from an electric powertrain economically. And yes, if there is more ride sharing, you can grow a little more BEV, but overall I would say the figures remain pretty close to the whatever 18-20% that we're talking about. And so a very stable forecast going forward. The good thing also is that consumers are really interested. If you look at the middle chart between 2010, 2016, and 2019, the number of people that would consider a BEV for the next car is 33%, and that's US figures. It's huge, and for PHEV it's 51%. And so we do have now a consumer that know and are reasonably interested, by buying BEVs. And on the right hand side, you have the level of satisfaction, and this is a 2019 figure where 70% of people who have bought an EV are likely to repurchase an EV. So that's critical, of course. If we don't get the customers with us, this market will not be able to grow as much as it could. But the degree of satisfaction is really high, and so we need to think we were going to see this trend of adoption continue as the economics improve. There's a bit of a mixed results through COVID. I mean, obviously, COVID is a crisis. Crisis impacts consumer behaviors, and these are the few things. This is the first 5 months of the year. In the US, we've seen a slight decline of EV plus PHEV, BEV plus PHEV penetration from 2.3% to 1.8%. We don't think this will stay for a long time, but for sure, people are more worried about buying a car that may be slightly more expensive, and so we see the decline. Europe is totally the opposite. We've seen an explosion from 2.9% EVs to 12.3% EVs, and again, EVs here is BEVs plus PHEVs. So the first 5 months of the year have seen this incredible explosion, which is also because in 2020 there will be huge fines, for OEs who don't meet the regulation, and so everybody has been out there making sure that they sell their share of EVs. Actually, this might even increase because since May, a number of governments, including Germany and France, have actually announced even higher subsidies, for EVs or electrified vehicles. So it may even boost that market. And China has gone from 4.8% to 3.4%. I would say this is not COVID related. This is because China had actually a 3-year plan that ended last year, and so was a bit short of incentives. And we know that incentives will be required until 2022. But China has more recently announced a new 3-year plan, and so we expect this figure to come back up again and to go back on the trajectory that we've just seen. The next thing I would like to share, and that's in our last report, is obviously there's no point in going electric unless we believe it is beneficial to global warming, and so the figures we made based on our revised report was basically to compare the emission of ICE in terms of CO2 emission, I would say for the vehicle production and for the vehicle operation, compared to BEV, both production and operation, for a number of different countries who have different electricity mix. So we have China as 182 compared to 166. So I would say it consumes a little more CO2 than an ICE. But again, this is within 10%. So, it's not totally significant. And as China's mix of electricity improves to cleaner energy, this will improve. If you look at the US, we're already beneficial at 148 versus 166. And obviously, there's a number of countries, for which it's even more beneficial. And the average of Europe is at 121. It also reinforces one of the points of the prior presentation, which is that, looking at, how much electricity we consume to produce batteries will become a more critical element for governments and regulators in general. So obviously, we have to be very careful and conscious about reducing the CO2 emission of battery and electric vehicles production. But overall, good news for the environment. A word on FC on fuel cells. You've seen that in our forecast we have a lot of batteries, not much fuel cells. It's just because we believe that between now and 2030 it will be a small share of passenger cars, and mainly when we look at fuel cells, both their operational performance and economic challenges, we see it actually more prone to support first heavy duty trucks and commercial vehicles, and then later passenger cars. So we would say that we think that fuel cells will play an increasing role in commercial vehicles, and we're probably going to wait until 2030 and beyond, although many governments have put in place ambitious programs and incentives, and we think it is not a factor at least by 2030. Now, on the supply side, the OEs are really now totally engaged. I think there's no question for them that even though there may be some hesitation in some places about where to take regulation, it's pretty clear now that the OEs are totally committed, and there's absolutely no question. And if you look on the right, on the number of vehicles, both BEVs and PHEVs, that various OEMs have planned to introduce between now and 2025, you have roughly 400 new energy vehicles that will come to market, and next year 2021 is going to be a key year for that. But already, if you look at Europe, this beginning of the year, you already had 3 major launches between the e-Golf, the E208 from PSA, and Tesla 3. In addition, obviously, to the Zoe that continues to be successful, you have a number of critical models that have been key to this explosion of EV market in Europe in the first 5 months. So supply will create demand as we fuel and provide products for more vehicle segments. Also, there's been a lot of debate about, is it good for OEs? And are they going to be able to survive and make money? You have here, I think, in various announcements by OEs, In red, you have those that believe it's not going to be profitable. Yellow is somewhere in the middle, but all the green are people who say, you know what, I mean, from day one will be profitable, and we expect margins on EVs to be the same as ICEs. And now, obviously, that has evolved through the past 5 years. But if you look at 2019, roughly, I mean, there's more green now than anything else. I think OEs are reasonably comfortable, especially those who started and are now at the second or third generation. They're very confident that they're going to be profitable. And I think that's what we're seeing right now as we look at the cost of producing EVs versus producing ICEs and the price they're being sold. We're very confident that the profitability in the next 2-3 years will be similar to ICEs, and therefore there's no reason for OEs to limit this evolution. As a last point, I'd like to say, obviously we have a forecast. It's very recent, basically a few months ago, and what we've seen lately, leads us to believe that this is happening. There's a few things that I'd like just to stress out in terms of plus and minuses that could either increase the EV penetration or potentially slow it down. But on the EV penetration, we do expect a bit of a bump where national governments incentivize EVs instead of ICEs. And in Germany, I think it was a big surprise for many that EVs have been supported and not in a way traditional conventional engines. So France has done it, Germany has done it. It could very well be that declines in battery pack cost continue to outpace our forecast and basically reach the 2030 target 2-3 years before that. And there are some OEs that have basically said that they think is going to happen earlier. City governments are gaining power, and if they decide to continue to limit emissions in city centers, I mean, some of them can surprise the national governments by basically deciding that they want zero emission vehicle earlier than we think. And then we talk a little more about how much an EV is more expensive to purchase than an ICE, but it totally depends on how you finance it. Because if you start financing the batteries and basically being paid on the fuel economy that the user is making, then you can reduce the purchasing cost of the vehicle itself, and it could become quickly at parity, even though the cost will be higher. A number of factors will decrease EV penetration. Obviously, if some national governments loosen their current CO2 regulatory standards, we know this is a discussion in the US. Personally, and that's very much a personal position, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's the country is too much divided on that to make a decision. But that obviously could slow down one market like the US compared to the others. It could also be that the post-COVID, shows a decline in vehicle sales due to the fact that people, want to buy, safer, cheaper cars, and therefore don't want to invest in an EV. We're not seeing that in what we're hearing from customers right now, and some countries are even beating the odds, like Europe. But at the same time, this is a possibility, and I think the next 2-3 months will be important to see how this impact, at least short term, the sales of EVs versus others. I would like to leave it there, and just now open to your questions, if anything.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Can you turn off your screen share?
Yes.
Well, we've seen a couple differences in terms of the, and we're going to have other speakers talk about this topic as well. But I just want to get your two cents on this and the differences that people are coming up with in terms of when price parity occurs. You're a little more optimistic than most people. Is it how people are measuring TCO?
So first of all, we think that most consumers in the US and elsewhere, one way or the other, look at total cost of ownership. And when we ask consumers in all countries, by the way, we see roughly the same three segments. There's a segment of people who just love electrification. They were the first buyer of hybrids and Priuses and so on, and they were the first buyers of EVs. That's typically, depending on countries, between 5 and 9% of the population. They're not too worried about payback. They're ready to pay a few thousand more dollars to have an electrified cars. This is not the market. It's a niche that has helped fuel the current buyers. We have another segment which is the most important in my mind for EVs, which is up to 50% of the population. So basically, if 6% is the first segment, that's the next 44% of the population who say, you know what, I'm sensitive to TCO. If you tell me that the car I buy will be more expensive, when I buy it, but I will save on the yearly cost, I'm ready to invest. And those people roughly say, I can invest between 3 to 6 years of future savings. And so the people who can invest a little more, can wait 6 years to pay back. That's actually, interestingly, if you look at Tesla's website, 6 years is what they take in terms of measuring their TCO. And then people who are more cost conscious at the beginning are more around 3 years. But this is a big share of the population. And if you look at the first and the second segment, that's already 50% of the consumers. So in the world, 50% of people are ready to pay more for an EV. And then you have the next 50% who say, you know what, a car is expensive. I don't want to invest. I will start buying EVs when they're at the same purchasing price than an ICE. I want to pocket the benefit, but I don't want to pay more. Now, our forecasts, show like 18%, let's say 20% of EVs in 2030. That's much less than the first 50% who like TCO. So for me, these are the real market for EVs right now. And again, if you look at a number of argumentations, including Tesla's, they're starting to show the consumer that if you buy a Tesla over 6 years, it's cheaper than starting buying one of the other premium cars. And so, I mean, this is real data. Now, there's the next question. If we want to address 100% of the market, which is how long will it take for a battery electric vehicle to be, in terms of purchase price, at the same price of the equivalent ICE? I think it's going to be around 2030. So the figures that you were quoting, Bruce, around 2033, I mean, I think are within the uncertainty range of what I would feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't need that to have a real market.
Good point. Good point. So one of the things that here's another question. It has to do with PHEV versus the BEVs. What's the driver? It says your analysis shows PHEVs never really get to price parity even by 2030. What is the driver by that time for consumers to purchase a PHEV versus a BEV?
Yeah. I would think that, I mean, in my mind, a PHEV is a convenience factor because, I can still drive on EV in zero emission zones if they happen. I don't have to have a recharging place, if close to my home or somewhere, it's hard for me to find recharging. And if I have a longer drive, which, is true for a number of people that, have to drive longer distances, I don't have to stop and recharge. So it is actually great for convenience, but I would say it's going to quickly be more expensive than buying a BEV. So for me, it's a share of the premium segment who, is not too worried about the purchase price and just want to have, all the benefits of an EV without having the inconvenience. But economically, I would say by 2030, I don't think anybody that would make a purely economic, argument, given the range of the car, given the cheaper price of a BEV compared to a PHEV, I don't think there will be a strong rationale to buy one.
I saw some of the recent research on PHEVs and how people drive them, and if they're not really using the battery, they're not really charging up, and they're just driving their vehicle on their engine, their actually emissions are worse than some ICE vehicles just by themselves.
Yeah.
Which could be a really negative piece of the story.
Yeah, and you're right. A number of governments, you mentioned the work I've been doing for the French president, but also in China, I've been worried about, having PHEVs in the market that people don't recharge. A number of OEs that I've met actually are ready to put in place some devices in the car that actually make sure that you use your EV capability in zero emission zones. And they're thinking about it, and they're talking to governments about how they can improve better behavior.
Interesting. Mike or Kareem, do you have anything you want to add on any of the questions that we've had so far?
Well, I do have an observation about battery costs in general. I noticed that you're mostly focused on TCO rather than purchase price in your analyses. And so how do you roll in your assumptions of battery cost into a TCO argument? Does that end up in the purchase price, the initial purchase price of the vehicle? So you are monitoring or calculating the purchase price, and maybe even from the ground up, like the components of the various vehicles of the electric powertrain as well. And also, I'd like to get some feedback on the concept that Bloomberg keeps saying, we're going to be on a glide path down to $62 a kilowatt hour by 2030. And I noticed that you're still projecting around $100 perhaps in a reasonable scenario. Do you think that's partly because of the limitations on material costs? Because right now material costs are probably around $60 a kilowatt hour, and they're probably not going to go down as a result of more demand. So do you think there's a floor on battery cost that would affect these projections?
So I think you had, so I'll take your two questions. The first one was on TCO and how we factor in battery cost. And the way we do it is actually we do a calculation every year between now and 2030. And every year we say, given the price of batteries and what we know of the various components of the pack and the electric powertrain, what is the purchase price of an ICE and what is the purchase price of a battery car that reduces every year. And if I'm, for instance, in 2023, I look at the cost of one and the other. I look at how much I'm going to save on fuel cost and maintenance cost, given how many miles I'm driving. And as a consumer, how long will it take me to pay back the additional purchase price of the BEV? And if we get to the 6 years, 5 years, 4 years that a set of customers agree with, I'm going to buy a BEV. That's basically how we're looking at it. And that's why every year you get a slightly bigger share of people who say, it's good for me. I've reached my payback period, and now it's time for me to buy one. And so if you agree with 6 years, you're going to start buying next year. But if you want 3 years, you're going to wait until 2025. And that's roughly how the model works. For your other question on Bloomberg, we've looked at many forecasts. And when we did this report, I've personally been meeting with all, the battery manufacturers in the world, also been meeting with many OEs to discuss, what was in a way their target price and the negotiation they were having. So I'm reasonably comfortable with what we have. Again, the only thing I don't know, because it has happened too many times, is, can this cost decline go faster? But we think it's reasonable. I think the 62 was and that's why we kept it on our page. It's a bit of an odd forecast. It's the outlier. So, I can't base my model, with an outlier. I think actually it makes the assumption that we're in solid state, with better chemistry and cheaper material. We don't think, and again, we could be wrong, but we don't think, given the discussion we've had, that by 2030, solid state, I think it will be available, but I don't think it's going to be a big factor yet in the car volume. Because we think that, if I made my assumption, 2025, we start having real solid state ready, but not for automotive applications. I don't think we're going to make that jump, especially if we have all the capacity installed in other technologies. It's going to be expensive. I think it's going to go first to more consumer electronics and these types of applications. It's going to take 5 years. And in 2030, we'll probably be ready then to start having solid state industrialized production for EVs. But again, that's one assumption. Mike, if you had a different one, I'd be happy to hear it as well.
No, this is actually very helpful. I'm always curious about how battery costs are being reality checked against the concept of a constant 7% year decline. But you also have to consider that there could be some mitigating factors, some limitations on the possibility for the decline to continue infinitely into the future. Thank you.
Reem, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, a minor comment on the dynamics between battery suppliers and OEMs. And I'm not in the supplier chain by any chance, but we've heard about it fairly enough. So when we talk about the price of batteries in year X, if a battery supplier and an OEM lock in a deal at that year, it usually freezes that price for a number of years to come. So when modeling what it takes or the cost of an electric vehicle in year X, you typically want to look at the price of batteries 2 to 3 years behind from there. So that might basically offset the predictions a few years there or a few years in one direction or the other.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good point. I mean, those battery costs can't be too theoretical because this is real market and real businesses. So we're reasonably confident with what we show here between now and 2025, because it's based on real discussions. It's not just based on modeling. I mean, again, we talk to both players. We discuss with them, what they could agree to. So this is based on real contracts. Interestingly enough, by the way, those real contracts, I think put a lot of pressure on the cost of the battery and the margins of the battery manufacturers because everybody wants to lock in enough volume to justify the capacity. And so margins are thin right now. A lot of OEs and players are worried about what the margin is going to be in the future because once you're locked in, battery manufacturers will suddenly need a little more margin, and they're worried then your prices may go up, not compared to the forecast, but at least compared to what it should be. And this is why, if you look at the OEs, a number of them are actually investing in battery technology to better understand where it should be going. Some may actually be investing in battery manufacturing to make sure that in case the negotiation wouldn't be fair, they would be ready to react. That's why, I think what we show here, it's not as ambitious as the 60, but we think going from where we are in 2025 to where we think we will be in 2030, we think actually this reduction is possible. And if it's not, you will see more OEs entering the battery market for sure, because at some point it's going to be 30% of the value of a car. They will want to make sure that they totally master both the choices, but also the prices. But yes, there is, I think, an area of, competitive play that we'll have to see unfolding in the next few years.
Yeah, it's a good point, Xavier. I was thinking that as well in relation to the GM LG Chem joint venture. So instead of just buying batteries from a supplier, well, we're going to do a joint venture, and there's some risk involved on both sides. And there's also going to be some play back and forth about where's the profit going to be made and how's it going to be distributed. And I think that's part of that story where the manufacturers are saying, and also suppliers, if margins are so thin, how do I make any money in this game? Well, joint venturing gives you a little more power in the relationship.
Yes, and you've seen, BMW and Volkswagen investing in Northvolt. Obviously, you see, how Tesla is pretty close to its, battery supplier. I mean, again, a lot of companies you've seen, PSA and now Renault, being part of the, French European battery project with Sefuten and Total. I mean, you see how, OEs are getting closer to batteries just to make sure that they can control what's going to happen.
Can you ever see them making their own batteries?
Today, or let's say 2 years ago, 80% of the battery market was for consumer electronics. And therefore, I mean, you're an auto guy. I mean, you have to rely on those who have the market and the technology and can pay for it. If you look in 2025, 80% of the market will be EVs. And so if I do the analogy of powertrains, where at the beginning of automotive, we all know that powertrain company were different companies than car manufacturers, but then they integrated as they were the only users of engines. If in 2025, 2030, basically OEs are the only users of batteries or the biggest users, I think it may make sense.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride.
No, it will be.
Good. Very good. All right. Thank you very much, Xavier. I think we're going to do a 10-minute break here. Our next presenter is Michael Sefuten from he's a senior mechanical engineer at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Transportation and Air Quality in Ann Arbor. He serves as a subject matter expert in electric vehicle technology and advanced battery design, and contributes to EPA rulemakings, as well as harmonization of global vehicle regulations relating to electrification. Michael, thank you for joining us. Why don't you start sharing your screen and take it away.
Okay. So hopefully everybody is now seeing the presentation. Okay, so might as well just go ahead and get started, assuming that everybody's seeing this. Anyway, my name is Mike Sefuten. I'm with the US EPA, and I think one of the reasons for this presentation today is it kind of speaks to what Bruce said early on in one of his points, that this whole concept of tipping points is driven by a lot of different drivers. And one of those, of course, is regulations. And of course, governments make regulations. And so governments obviously have to have a very good idea of what the technologies are that are out there and when they might be able to come online when we're designing our regulations. And so that's what I'm going to cover a little bit today, is what we at the EPA office in Ann Arbor are doing in that area. So just a general outline of what we'll cover today.
Michael?
Yes.
Why don't you put it on down at the bottom, or start the slideshow?
Yeah, I did that, and it did not do anything.
Can you go down to the bottom and click on it?
Ah, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, much better. All right. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about how we engage stakeholders at the EPA, and also show a few of the types of publications that we've worked on in the past. And then I want to spend most of the time covering the areas of interest to us in EV technology assessment. Our job here, at least my job, is to assess technology, and I'm a subject matter expert in electric vehicles. So I cover battery costs, battery materials demand, what we call non-battery components, which is everything but the battery, obviously, and also charging technologies. And then I'll talk a little bit about EV cost parity, which really speaks to the tipping points that we're talking about today. So a little bit about the EPA Office of Transportation and Air Quality. Now, the EPA is a fairly large organization, but we do have a branch in Ann Arbor that does primarily two things. One is emissions testing and working with manufacturers on calibrations and that sort of thing. And the other half of what we do here in Ann Arbor is designing and implementing regulations, partly on greenhouse gases, on criteria pollutants, and so forth. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this diagram, but I just want to point out that the portion of EPA I'm talking about today is just a very small portion, the part that's in Ann Arbor. And it's not to say that we only do what I'm talking about even in Ann Arbor, but we also do a lot of testing and so forth. So if you're on the testing and compliance side, you'll see a totally different side of the laboratory that I'll be talking about today. But I'll be talking about mostly our regulatory development and our technology assessments. So what is Otac's interest in EV technology? Well, obviously it's to inform rulemakings where electrification is a possible compliance option. So in the sense that our regulations do drive technology to some degree, we need to be aware of what technologies are available. So two examples of why we're so keenly interested in this is that when we write a greenhouse gas regulation, for instance, or any light duty vehicle emission standards, electrified vehicles are one option for automakers to comply with those regulations. We don't dictate technologies, but we try to set performance standards, and then we need to understand, of course, how the automakers might react to those standards in terms of technology. Another example that's come up recently is for the Clean Trucks Initiative. I've been asked to evaluate the possibility of credits or incentives for heavy-duty electrification. And so at times we need to assess the technology on the heavy-duty side as well as on the light-duty side. But generally, accounting for the cost and environmental outcome of our rulemakings is required by Congress. And so we need to have an understanding of the availability of technologies, their effectiveness, and their cost, including electrification, which is my specialty. And we achieved this goal by having a large number of subject matter experts, we call them. I'm the subject matter expert in electrification. We also have experts in things like transmission technologies, conventional engines, advanced engines, and so forth. And we do spend a lot of time researching these topics by going to meetings directly with stakeholders and auto manufacturers and suppliers. We attend a lot of conferences, and we do some original research and publish a few publications. So just a few examples of stakeholder engagement that I personally have participated in recently. There's a list of conferences you can see here that I attend every year as a battery and electric vehicle expert. We also present at some of these conferences. We're also co-organizers of some of them. And we also maintain some ongoing research collaborations with various organizations across the world. We work with Argonne National Laboratory on the backpack battery cost model. We'll get into that in a little more detail in a moment. We've worked with the European Joint Research Center and Environment and Climate Change Canada on test procedure development. I do some work for the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe to develop global technical regulations. One hot topic right now is battery durability. And Ken mentioned the need for some kind of a monitor like a battery odometer. We're actually working quite actively in that area to come up with a regulation to understand how much a battery has been used. And also we work on the SAE government industry meeting, and I'm an advisor on the battery show. And of course, you can imagine that for all of our other subject matter experts, they could put together a slide very similar to this. It just gives you a flavor of the type of engagement that we routinely take part in. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide, just a few EPA publications that I've personally been involved in. It just indicates the breadth of the type of original research that we do here at the lab. And of course, this is only pertaining to the things that I've worked on. If you were to see a list of all of our publications, it would be several times bigger than this. So one of the things that we do is estimating battery costs. I'm the primary point person for that at our lab. Primarily, we use Argonne National Lab's BATPAC model. It's for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a very detailed bill of materials type of model that designs a battery pack from the ground up, given performance requirements and other things like the topology of the battery. So you can see on the right side here, an example of part of the input screen. You can suggest the vehicle type, the coolant type, the target capacity and kilowatt hours, the target power at 20% SOC, and then you can provide some details on the topology of the battery pack. And then it will come up with an estimate of how much it would cost to produce that pack for a specific volume if the battery plant is designed to produce primarily that battery. We did go through a peer review of this model, so we're quite confident in its effectiveness and validity. We managed the peer review. It was conducted independently of EPA, using a lot of experts from the battery industry. And we continue to work closely with ANL to test out new versions and request new features. And they regularly updated to reflect trends in manufacturing. There's a recent version of 4.0 that reflects some new developments. And also to add some of the new capabilities that, among others, we suggest. So some of our uses for battery cost estimates in general and for BATPAC, obviously to supply current and future battery costs for our technical assessments, because battery costs are obviously a very large part of the equation when you're trying to predict cost parity and things like that. We also find it very useful for analyzing products and predictions that we read about in the literature. Manufacturers and suppliers are not always upfront about all the details of their new products, like their hybrid batteries, for instance, but often we can piece together enough information from the press reports and then plug those into BATPAC and fill in some of the blanks. We can get some idea of what the topology of the battery probably is, if we know the capacity of the battery, the ampere hour size of the cells, and so forth. So we find it useful as kind of a detective type of tool to find new information. And we also have explored battery costs for heavy duty hybridized trucks, as I mentioned earlier. And BATPAC actually does not do those directly, but because it is an open source model, we can go in and make changes or make additions or deductions to account for other components that might be involved. And as I said, we plan to continue collaborating with ANL to further expand its capabilities. So for battery materials demand and availability, we're also very aware of the influence this can have on future predictions of battery costs. And it's very difficult to predict what might happen. A tool like BATPAC takes static values for battery raw materials. But if we project out to 2025 or 2030, we really don't know where those material costs are going to go. And sometimes we don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else does, but we do need to be aware of where we might place those uncertainty bounds based on the types of scarcity and the types of uncertainty that we anticipate. So we try to keep track of the causes of potential scarcity. There are resource reasons, like there are different nickel ore types, class 1 and class 2. And there's investment being made in class 2, but class 2 isn't really very suitable for batteries. And so those little nuances are sometimes very important in understanding what might happen in the future and how it might affect costs. There are geopolitical issues as well, like ethical sourcing of cobalt from mines in Africa, export limitations that might happen because certain countries want to protect their sources of strategic materials, and also economic things that we follow too, because production capacity might lag the demand for electric vehicles. It requires a lot of capital to invest in new sources of raw materials, and often the justification can't be made economically to actually bring these sources online. And also the profitability of things like recycling, because there will be a lot of resources tied up in existing batteries that are waiting to be recycled. And if it's not profitable, that might end up being a sink. A lot of it just ends up going there and staying there. So we try to keep track of these influences. And also we want to track how sensitive battery costs are to changes in material costs. We can do that very easily by running different scenarios with different costs in BATPAC. Also, we keep track of new battery technologies and how the riskiest materials might be avoided in the future. And also, we have other people who pay more attention to system level effects, like how would rapid growth in EV adoption affect potential scarcity and also growth in the demand for critical resources. And then the other thing I touched on today was material costs and how they might establish a floor on battery cost reduction. Because obviously, if somebody's predicting that battery costs will get down to $20 a kilowatt hour in the future, and the materials are 50 or 60, it seems a little bit suspect. So there are things that we pay attention to there. We also pay attention to non-battery powertrain components. In the past, since we started with the greenhouse gas regulation for 2017 to 2025, that was in 2009 and 2010 that we were studying non-battery costs. And so there were very few sources available. And so we commissioned some very extensive teardown studies of some early stage EV technologies to get a handle on what these costs might be in the future. But today, teardowns are quite common. They can be purchased commercially. We don't have to design them ourselves and purchase the vehicles and have a contractor tear them apart. Some examples are recently in the last couple of years, Monroe came out with teardowns of the Chevy Bolt and Model 3, which are very informative. And in fact, they are the same contractor who subcontracted with our contractor to do the teardowns for us. So we have a lot of confidence that these sources could be very good. UBS published a report on the Chevy Bolt, also based on the Monroe teardown. And as another example, we've worked with the California Air Resources Board on research in the past, and they published a teardown of power electronics just in the last couple of years, and we used some of those numbers as well. So in 2018, we reviewed all of these news sources and came out with a paper on how we would revise the battery and non-battery costs for battery electric vehicles if we were called to do so again. And that was published at the EVS 31 conference in October. And we continue to monitor these new sources through our stakeholder engagement, as I showed you on one of the previous slides. And we're considering new teardowns as well to meet specific needs that we can't find in the literature. So one interesting thing we're looking at now is non-powertrain BEV specific costs. So we've talked about batteries, and we've talked about non-battery components, which are the powertrain components. But one thing that's on our radar now that's being talked about more and more is that over time, battery electric vehicles may be inherently simpler than conventional vehicles. And those differences may not be captured simply by looking at the powertrain and the battery itself. BEV powertrains are shown to have fewer moving parts. The Monroe teardown showed that. It actually quantified that. BEVs have no tailpipe emissions, and the implications of that and the fact that they have fewer moving parts is that there might be a lower design cost, lower assembly cost. Certainly calibration you would expect to be cheaper because there's less NVH issues. And certification, of course, if there are no emissions, we don't have to worry about tailpipe emissions at least, although there is some expense in certifying it for range, for instance. But this all suggests that maybe we might need to assume something different for indirect costs than we have in the past. Usually we use something like a 30 to 50% markup on the direct manufacturing costs, but I think it's also true that Zhangguan's presentation suggested that in looking at cost parity, you might want to adjust some of the indirect costs as well. So we're not certain how we would do that, but we are looking at that possibility. In the past, we simply deleted the conventional vehicle powertrain and added on a battery electric vehicle powertrain. But if you look at the right here at these skateboard designs that are coming out now, it kind of suggests that the savings could extend beyond just those powertrain components. If you look at that chassis, that includes all of the motive components, including the battery and the structure of the vehicle. So you can imagine that if any kind of a body can be put on that, then I don't think deleting the powertrain from a conventional vehicle and then putting on a battery electric powertrain is necessarily a valid model anymore. It might be valid if we're just retrofitting existing vehicles like was done with the Chevy Volt, for instance. But if it's a design from the ground up, we probably have to start looking at costs on an absolute basis and for a wider range of component types, not just the powertrain. Charging technologies are also very interesting to us. Home charging equipment, we consider to be part of the cost of BEV adoption. So we go a little bit off the vehicle there and look at the cost of the equipment and whether or not a typical consumer is going to need a service upgrade or additional circuitry at least to install that EVSA equipment. So it's not entirely just vehicle components that we have to be aware of. So some example of some of the issues that we track are the percentage of homes that opt for level 1 or level 2. And Gil Tal is doing a lot of good research on that out of UC Davis. We keep track of his work. And the percentage actually needing upgrades in their garage in order to go level 2. And also efficiencies of onboard charging equipment are another vehicle-related thing. Level 1 and level 2 onboard charging equipment can be dramatically different in efficiency, and that really affects a lot of the upstream emissions. Efficiencies, costs, and demand for DC fast charging is another very interesting topic, especially with extreme fast charging. If we have to design batteries to accommodate extreme fast charging, that's going to increase the cost of those batteries. So that might affect the possibility of getting down to a glide path of $100 or less per kilowatt hour. And of course, we also look at the other technology issues like wireless charging options for multi-unit dwellings, and generally developments in public charging, which is considered to be a fairly important thing for consumer adoption of electric vehicles. Now, the most interesting thing to me right now is the issue of cost parity. I've been asked by my boss's boss's boss about what is this that I keep hearing about cost parity, and how should I understand what this is? Because people keep approaching me with these very intriguing questions, but I don't know how to answer them. And so we're embarking on an effort to get our heads around cost parity. And so the way that we break it down right now in the most general sense is that it's obviously a projected point in time when battery electric vehicles and conventional vehicles are about the same cost. And as we've seen in Ken's presentation, you can look at that as a TCO sort of thing, or you can look at it as a purchase price sort of thing. But ultimately, we try to break it down into the question of when will cost no longer pose an argument regarding BEV adoption. Right now, I think consumers are obviously sensitive to purchase price. They're sensitive to TCO. But when will that actually happen that it's no longer an argument? You might still have arguments about, well, the range isn't as good, or the performance is different, or I don't want to have to plug it in. But at some point, we anticipate that cost will no longer be the issue. And then the other side of the coin is what will happen when that happens. So to navigate cost parity, I just point out that it is an increasingly popular talking point that challenges us in a lot of different ways with very interesting qualitative ideas. As a construct, it's often associated with very provocative claims, such that cost parity will end the need for subsidies or incentives. I hear that fairly often. Cost parity will mark a tipping point right towards EV dominance. Cost parity is just around the corner, and charging infrastructure, better get going because it isn't ready. And also, when cost parity arrives, it can mean a battery shortage. So all of these are very provocative ideas. Cost parity can be a quantitative exercise. You can do it in a spreadsheet, but it's still subject to many uncertainties. And these uncertainties also extend to the qualitative claims that often accompany this. And so we're trying to look at cost parity not just as a quantitative exercise to predict a specific year, but also to understand how it affects the possibility of a tipping point, and also what the implications actually are. So when is cost parity? Well, that's one of the questions that my boss's boss's boss did ask me. And it was very hard to answer because I had to show him a chart like this. Well, that basically said, well, we just don't really know. There are a lot of different opinions. There are many studies out there. We've reviewed every one of these studies. They all have different assumptions. They reach different conclusions. Some are based on detailed component cost analyses like we might choose to do. Some are just based on the concept of when batteries reach $100 a kilowatt hour without doing a whole lot of detailed component-wise work. And some are more sophisticated than others. Some, like the MIT report, include sensitivities for different expectations for battery cost and for other uncertainties. And some are rather simplistic. But when you look at the numbers here, they're all kind of saying in the 2020s, generally, we can expect batteries to get to about $100 a kilowatt hour. And the predictions for cost parity often track are very similar to that. And of course, you can see some are based on purchase, some are based on TCO. So we have to keep track of that as well. So we need to, here at the EPA, our goal is to develop the ability to not only review these studies, but also to understand how they compare and contrast and come up with our own ideas about what we believe is going to happen. And the big thing here, obviously, is probably everybody on this call knows, cost parity is not a single point in time, but this is something that has to be communicated to our stakeholders fairly firmly, because if you look at the ICCT study, which we reported, came out in 2019, this shows very clearly that it depends on what type of vehicle you're talking about and whether or not it's initial cost or total cost of ownership. And so our goal is to have a model that can come up with these different scenarios pretty much on the fly, much like ICCT did, so that when we engage with stakeholders and say, what's our opinion about when it's going to happen, we can break that down into, well, do you mean TCO or do you mean initial cost, and how long is the range of the vehicle, what type of the vehicle is it, and so forth. And then we can have what we consider to be a technically defensible answer that we would stand behind. Other parity issues are also very much of interest to us. When we hear about cost parity, often it's intertwined with a lot of other parity issues, like convenience parity, for instance. I'm not sure that we're going to get to convenience parity or value parity or utility parity on the same timetable as we might get to cost parity. So convenience parity is just the concept of, well, it's no less convenient for me to own and operate a BEV. If I have to plug it in on level 1 every night and then wait for 16 hours before it's fully charged, I might see that as being less convenient. But if fast charging becomes ubiquitous, then maybe that goes away. Value parity, we want consumers to feel that they get just as much for their money when they buy a BEV. Utility, I get no less usefulness from a BEV than an ICE EV. And choice parity is also very important because there are some electric vehicles available out there, as we all know, but but we can't necessarily get an electric vehicle from, like, say, Subaru, for instance. They just don't have one right now. So if you're a Subaru fan, you're out of luck. And if you want an electric pickup, you can't get one of those either. You're out of luck. So just like relative cost, all of these other types of parity are very important as well to consumer acceptance. And we want to try and get a handle on those too, but keep them somewhat separate from the specific question of cost parity, which at least can be looked at quantitatively. And just to be provocative, I wanted to mention a couple of other things that we're thinking about on a philosophical level. Is cost parity really entirely necessary for wider EV adoption? For instance, the analogy that I see stated quite a lot is that smartphones never reached cost parity with landlines. The thing that made smartphones ubiquitous was the fact that there's added utility and added convenience, and we're willing to pay more for that. So the implicit question is that, what if EV cost parity never happens? It never happened for smartphones, but we still have smartphones and we love them. If EV cost parity never happens and we assume that it must happen, well, what do we do if something like strategic battery materials end up being more expensive than we thought, or we have a pandemic, and so EV cost parity doesn't quite happen as soon as we think would happen? Well, does that mean that we're never going to get EVs? Probably not. So we need to be aware of the other influences that might also be responsible for causing a tipping point. And then you look at cost parity and we ask, is it sufficient for a tipping point? And it seems to me that equal cost for equal utility is probably not enough to get everybody to jump over to a relatively unfamiliar technology. But the significance of cost parity might not be that it instantly overnight becomes a tipping point, as some people suggest. But it certainly could potentially mark the start towards a glide path to actually lower cost for batteries, which might actually be very influential at becoming a tipping point. So regardless of these broader philosophical issues, the fact is that having an ability to model the relative cost of battery electric vehicles over time can actually help predict some very meat and potatoes types of things that we need, such as predicting the propensity for EV adoption and fleet penetration over time. So this is my final slide. I just want to touch upon some of the work that we're planning to do on cost parity, and hopefully this will dovetail with some of the other work that some of the other speakers are talking about. The technical work, which is primarily my domain, is we're obviously going to continue our efforts to reach out to stakeholders to get information on battery costs and component costs. That's part of our day-to-day technical assessment activities. We are planning to ramp up our engagement with technical experts at Argonne National Labs and DOE in general, the California Air Resources Board, and the NGOs and the academic community as well during this process. And we also plan on some stakeholder meetings to talk more about skateboard type of platforms and what manufacturers' expectations are there for reduced cost. And we recognize that costs are a primary input to any cost parity model. So that's why we'll continue gathering this, but with even more importance than before. And we are developing a BEV cost parity modeling capability just so that we can implement and track the relevant inputs and make our own assessment. And this will help us compare and contrast the studies that are out there. And also, we want to help develop insight so that my boss's boss's boss, for instance, can understand cost parity at a deeper level and come up with some well-reasoned responses to some of the claims that we see. So for instance, one high-level output we'd like to have is when does EPA expect to see cost parity across most vehicle segments? And is parity already here in some markets? So we could make the argument that perhaps Tesla is showing that in the luxury and eco-conscious market, cost parity might already be there because they're selling a large number of vehicles and they're taking away a lot of the business from other luxury manufacturers. And also delivery and mobility as a service could present some very compelling TCO arguments right now. And also the issue of whether cost parity is necessary and sufficient And would cost parity really affect the need for policy measures or incentives to be part of our rulemakings? And so with that, that's essentially all I wanted to cover today. I hope that wasn't too short, but I think that it is important for everyone to know that the EPA is paying a lot of attention to these issues. That's why we attend conferences exactly like this. And I thank Bruce for offering us an opportunity to clarify exactly the kind of things that we're thinking about. And I think that all of these things are quite important for all of us to think about, not just government agencies. But thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Could you stop sharing your screen? There you go. Thank you. One of the questions that came up has to do with something you've already touched on, had to do with the materials story. And when you start thinking about tipping points and the issue of the materials that are needed to have high volume batteries, how are you guys looking at that now?
Well, as I suggested, we don't have a crystal ball on those things either. But the way that we would plan to look at it is to keep track of the macro level influences and then translate those into some kind of an uncertainty bound. We do keenly attend the presentations from the various analysis firms in materials, which are making a much wider appearance in technical conferences these days than they did in the past. And it's very important that we understand that it's possible to predict, to put uncertainty bands and error bars on specific material costs. And once we establish where those error bars might be, then to come up with a new battery cost projection, we would just plug those revised costs into BATPAC and then see how that affects the costs. And so rather than just predicting that battery costs for a 150-mile BEV in the year 2025 is going to be $125 a kilowatt hour based on BATPAC, we would establish some sort of a range where the upper bound might be, I don't know, 150, and then the lower bound would be, accordingly lower. So we try to stay nimble, but of course we don't have a crystal ball. So we just try to translate that into where our error bounds and our uncertainty band would be, so that we can do some appropriate sensitivities.
Do you see? Are they seeing when you talk to the experts about the availability of the materials in large scale? I mean, when we talk about the auto industry with 80 million vehicles a year, if we turned over the fleet and said, okay, those are all going to be BEVs now, the amount of materials needed it's going to be dramatic. It's going to be dramatic. Now, I'm not talking about turning over the whole fleet. Let's say within the 2030 timeframe, when we are talking about 16% of the fleet. How are they talking about the availability of the materials?
Well, what you usually see among the analysts who follow commodities markets, they often try to take the stance, rightfully so, that the market will eventually solve this. These are usually cyclical types of businesses. They go boom and bust. There's high demand, and they're not prepared. Then they bring on the capacity at a very high cost, and then suddenly there's more capacity than necessary. We're seeing some of that happen in lithium right now. There are some issues about class 1 and class 2 nickel. Class 1 nickel is the best for battery use because class 2 is used primarily for stainless steel and things that don't need to be quite so pure. But from what I hear, and there are differences of opinion on this, but because there is a big demand for stainless steel today, there is more capital investment going into building out class 2 nickel capability. And that doesn't really do anything for battery grade nickel. And so over time, I get the sense that these things will eventually iron themselves out, but there is a potential for cost crunches to appear on fairly short time scales. We saw that with lithium and cobalt in the past. Things seem to be fairly stable right now, but the problem is that capital investment in mining is not something that's very easy to sell when it's more of a long-term issue. So we're seeing a lot of these traditional classical economic type of influences going on. And so I think it's important to understand that at any given point, there may be spikes or maybe lack of spikes or maybe even sudden cost reductions due to a glut of material. And the important thing is to understand the sensitivity of battery costs to specific materials. And so we can run sensitivities like that. And surprisingly, the cost of lithium certainly does not exert a very strong impact on the cost at the pack level of battery materials costs. Certainly not as much as you would expect. It's only about 1% of the content of a battery. But certainly if cobalt prices were to spike and we were not successful at going to a very low cobalt and extremely low cobalt cathode chemistry, then you can imagine that just the availability to get some of these materials could materially impact the ability just to produce them, no matter what the price. So we try to keep track of those things, but as I said, nobody has a crystal ball. We just try to be as nimble as possible to try and account for the effects.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up based on your response was, are there potential regional dependencies
Yes.
on materials?
Yeah, and I mean, there is some evidence that over time we could develop our own very productive lithium sources in the U.S. Over time, we could go back to that old memory that we used to get certain things like cobalt as a byproduct of copper production, which we don't do as much of as we used to in the past. There are mines in Canada that have been unused for a long time that could be good sources of cobalt. But again, it comes down to the ability to attract investment to build out those resources again.
Absolutely, yeah. Kareem and Ken, do you have any responses or questions that you wanted to ask Mike?
I would like to give a shout out for Batpack, which I think is an amazing tool, and I have only recently started dabbling in it. Me and Ken can probably speak to it more than myself, but we've been in the past and up till now, and in all the work we do, very strong proponents of open source calculations and putting it out in the open.
Yeah, we find it to be very useful just because it is transparent. We in our rulemakings, we're required by law to put in the rulemaking docket all of the models, all of the calculations that we use to make our decisions. And so with Batpack, it was very, very seductive because not only did it have a bill of materials approach, which we use for our teardowns, but also it was completely transparent. Nobody needs to have a license to it. It doesn't cost anything. And so we can actually literally take copies of Batpack that I have put my numbers into, put them into the docket, and then everybody can see it. And it's very easy to use. You don't need special software. Anybody with Excel can use it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I'll just say that I appreciate Bruce introducing us to Mike. You know, we've only lived here in Ann Arbor for I don't know how many decades, and probably work about a half mile apart. And
yeah,
I think just watching your presentation, Mike, I think you'll see that we actually have a lot of overlapping interests, and we're posing many of the questions in the same way, including this crossover point, this tipping point. We do also see, price being an issue. We recently took a look at people who were going to buy a new car, and if they had BEV on their short list and then chose not to buy a BEV, almost all of them said their main reason, I shouldn't say almost all, well over 50% said price was the number one reason that they decided, either price or value for price or whatever. And yes, TCO means you pay a little extra upfront and you save money as time goes on. But there's also, most consumers don't come to a dealership with a spreadsheet. It's one of their considerations. And so, if you push that break even point past a couple of years, it starts becoming less effective as a way to persuade someone to make that upfront investment.
Yeah,
But
we're very aware of that, and I think it's also important to point out that consumer acceptance in general is something that is very hard to quantify and very hard to model. And we have a whole group of people who are studying how consumer acceptance might be modeled. And obviously, one of the things that's important to acceptance is understanding what kind of a timescale consumers think about when they're thinking about total cost of ownership. I think most people, it enters their mind, but they have very different payback periods, and that would have to be part of the thing that goes into a model of that type.
And I know when we've done some modeling on TCO, we had what's the return on investment? When do things start evening out, or when do we start coming into the pluses on this? And we usually had the model in 3 and 5 year different timeframes.
Yeah, businesses love TCO. It's a very strong argument for them because they're very rational. They're all about making profit. It's all about the bottom line. But consumers, of course, are not quite as technical as that.
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely see this in the heavy truck industry, where they're always about the bottom line, right? And they want a return on investment quick, or they're not even going to invest in it. But if you can, they're willing to listen. Yeah. Because they turn over their vehicles so quickly, especially the larger trucking companies. They only go for like 3 years, and then they're already moving their vehicles out. But that means they have to get the return on investment within 3 years, or they're not going to do it.
Yeah, they have to have resale value as well for when they turn that vehicle over too.
Exactly. Which is we brought that up earlier, and number of presenters talked about the secondary market for EVs. It's a huge issue. Thanks very much, Mike. Our next set of speakers, a tag team, if you will. Kareem Hamza is a principal engineer at the Toyota North America R&D Center, and Ken Laberto, also from the Toyota R&D Center. Now, Kareem has been working with them for a number of years now. His current research interests include modeling and analysis of electrified powertrains, as well as environmental impact and societal uptake of future mobility and transportation systems. And Ken has really been at this for a while, almost as long as I have, Ken. His 25 years in the automotive and telecommunication industries, Ken has produced 48 scholarly publications and 18 patents. Ken's current research focus is sustainable mobility systems, including mobility as a service, vehicle electrification, automated driving, and U.S. urbanization and transportation patterns. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Bruce, and thank you to all of the participants. Bruce, I think you put together a really interesting panel, learned a lot from each of the other presentations, and I'm also kind of struck by how, almost repetitive our presentation is going to be for those who have sat through the several ones before that. There is a lot of uncertainty. If we didn't have that uncertainty, I think our path forward would be very clear. And as a result of the uncertainty, it's just extremely hard to answer a policymaker and say, oh yeah, 2028 is the number, or 2022. And we've all been making predictions today. Kareem and I are going to make some predictions. It reminds me of the great 20th century philosopher Yogi Berra's comment about predictions being very hard, especially about the future. And I point that out just because if you don't like my predictions, the good news is that I'm probably wrong. But I also say, and it wasn't my line, but someone clever said all models are wrong. Some of them are useful. So we hope that this model is at least somewhat useful. This is an outline of our talk. We're going to start with the overview and motivation, which I'll speak to. Then Kareem will speak on the next two sections on total cost of ownership, our bottom-up model, as well as introduce our baseline results. Then I'll return to talk about some sensitivity analysis and then conclude. So in 2019, according to Kelley Blue Book, if you were in the market for a mid-sized vehicle, these are some of the choices you would have had. You can see that we haven't identified each of the vehicles, but we haven't tried very hard to hide their identity either. So these are all vehicles that were available for sale in 2019 and had roughly the same, seating capacity and luggage capacity and so forth. We saw that the PHEVs and the BEVs did have some incentives. And in addition, next slide, there are questions of resale value and also the running cost. And again, these are topics that have been introduced very frequently today. If we were to go with a pure TCO kind of mindset, we would look here and say that the PHEVs actually, in that snapshot of time, were very attractive. Many of them are very attractive depending on your needs, but from a pure, which is the least money, the PHEVs fared actually very well. But we know that incentives never last forever, and at some point we think that these vehicles are going to have to be competitive without large government expenditures. And we also, as we've been talking about today, know that the price of many of the major subcomponents of these vehicles are also evolving and changing, mostly becoming cheaper, but not always exclusively that. So the question then becomes, how do we approach these decisions? How do we, as a car company, decide what to put in the marketplace? What do we as consumers expect our vehicles to do for us? A point that I want to make here is whenever you talk about price modeling, especially about future vehicles, you have to remember that generally in our economy, the price to buy something is only loosely correlated with the price to make, the cost to make it, right? Whether we're talking about cell phones or computers or jeans or tennis shoes or whatever, the market will bear whatever price it will bear. And so it would be incorrect to assume that the price that you see at the dealership is exactly the price, or is exactly the price plus some fixed constant or multiplier. So there is some kind of hidden incentives that goes on, especially across an OEM, which has many different vehicles and different classes and different goals. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide a bottom-up cost model. And as Kareem mentioned, we tend to like public data sources. We think that should be strongly encouraged in our research space, because these are very important questions affecting a big chunk of our economy. And there's a lot of course, people who are particular to one answer than another. It's great if you can put out open source, verifiable, repeatable experiments. And so what you're going to be getting from us, even though we both work for OEMs, as well as our third co-author, Jean Chu, you're not going to see anything proprietary Toyota in this. This is all material that we found in the literature, that we have either applied or modified, or, if they're varying approaches in the literature, implicitly the ones that we're including are preferences and we'll try and give those explanations. But this is, if you came expecting to see lots of internal Toyota pricing data, I'm sorry, you came to the wrong talk. So now I'll turn it over to my co-author, Kareem.
Thanks, Ken. So in looking at the bottom-up cost model, we're going to be examining some of the costs of the major powertrain components, both in conventional and electrified powertrains, and then moving on to building that up into a expectation for the purchase price, and then later on we introduce a running cost, and then comes out the total cost of ownership. So starting with battery costs, even in present day, 2018 or 2019, 2020, there's quite a bit of a wide range of reports on what it really costs to buy a battery to make a vehicle. So there's a wide range, and there are various studies that are looking at that. And of course, even more uncertainty in the future. There's a bit less of a parity in the literature about what it costed 2 years back in 2016. And this is basically what we use our starting point in our battery price modeling. For future, there is a consensus that with lithium-ion battery technologies, the ones that are on the market now, they would come closer to around $100 per kilowatt hours, but probably not significantly below that, without new technologies, new chemistries, solid-state batteries, that sort of thing. There's also a fairly good argument to be made that between being proven performance, that it's suitable to be put on a vehicle that actually drives on the road and be sold to consumers, it takes about 10 years for a new technology to become the new standard in the industry. And based on that, we set our sort of endpoints from 2016 to 2030 at those two numbers. We assumed a fixed % annual rate just to, if we want to interpolate in between the 2016 to 2030 timescale. And I'd admit that the $108 per kilowatt hours might be a little bit of a conservative side for 2030. We later in this study also conduct a sensitivity analysis that brings it all the way down to $88 per kilowatt hour, which is probably below the capability for lithium-ion batteries, but by 2030, you might be seeing some of the newer battery chemistries and battery technologies coming into the market. We also acknowledge in our model that there is a markup for the power rates for PHEV or plug-in hybrid vehicle battery packs. So they're usually marked up by about 25% based on one of the literature sources that we've cited in our paper. And that's what we go with for battery pack sizes. Some other notes is that the sizing of a battery pack, that's one of the things to keep in mind. The usable battery is different than the total sizing of the battery. So you pay for X amount of kilowatt hours to install in a vehicle. Typical operation for battery sustainability and long life and stuff usually only uses a fraction of that. And the other thing is that when sizing a battery for a certain range, the catalog value that's published in the EPA fuel economy guide is usually with a socketed meter, so it draws power from the grid rather than power from the battery. So there is a charger efficiency in between there that has to be accounted for. And those are some of the finer details that we've accounted for in our model. And again, further details in the spreadsheet or our full paper. For other components, we followed a first order, or otherwise called a linear regression cost model, where the cost is basically some constant number plus a linear coefficient multiplied by the power rating. And this applies to all the other subsystems in the powertrain. For an engine subsystem, we refer to the engine itself, plus the controller, cooling system, air intake, exhaust, catalyst, after treatment, all of those. And similar with the motor subsystem, it includes the motor and all the power electronics. Noted assumptions that this general formula fits various publications in the literature. However, the values of the coefficient in the formula might differ. We've reviewed quite a bit of public open source publications there, mainly distilling down to 4 of those, one by NREL and one by Carnegie Mellon University, as well as 2 other publications, one by the ICT and one referring to the National Academy of Science report. We mostly adopted the ones by NREL and Carnegie Mellon Universities, which in turn date back to a work that was done by ANL in the early 2000s. So it's somewhat dated, but we believe it's still fairly valid for engine costs, because engines are mature enough technologies that we don't expect them to be changing that much. Similar with transmission. So transmission is essentially a gearbox or a gearbox with accessories. We do make a distinction in our model between a single speed reducer, which is typically used for battery electric vehicles, so only a single speed reduction, versus multi-speed or continuous variable transmission that's being used with ICEs, HEVs, and plug-in hybrids. For motor costs, however, we conduct further review of the literature. And looking at the 4 major differences, there's quite a bit of a difference there. However, I mean, looking at citing the references and then references of the references, it all either dates back to early 2000s in terms of actual market data. So again, might be slightly outdated. We took a look at retail values. If I personally would want to go and buy a motor for an electric vehicle from the sites like EV West or Thunderstruck Motors, the prices do fit nicely into a linear regression model. However, the retail prices are vastly different than the values in the literature. So and it's natural that we expect that OEMs do have a discount, but we don't know how much such a discount would be. So again, that's sort of a dead end. There is no clear answer as to what's the best price model for electric motors as of today. Looking at the various formulas for the 4 main sources, scaling versus the power rating of the electric drive. We do have one data point from a publication in 2011, but that's about it. It's strikingly very difficult to find public data for the actual costs of an electric drive. So in that case, we adopted a regression model that's closer to the NREL CMU model based on various critique of those publications we've cited. So moving forward from there, for the 2018 scenario, this is how much a powertrain costs. And with our predictions for a baseline scenario for 2030, this is how much a powertrain costs, just the powertrain. And we are making distinctions here between 3 different size categories, regular sedan, a crossover, and a full SUV. And then within each one of those, we're considering a conventional ICE vehicle, a plug-in hybrid with 50 miles range, and then pure battery electric vehicles with 150 miles, 200 and 250 mile ranges. Next is looking at the non-powertrain parts of the vehicle. We refer to the teardown report by UBS, which estimate that was done for the Golf, as well for the Volkswagen Golf, as well as for the Bolt. For the Golf, or the conventional ICE, it was estimated that the direct cost of the rest of the vehicle was about $12,700, and then for the Bolt was about $12,600. So not so much of a difference between the non-powertrain components in the vehicle here. And these numbers we just scaled up according to an ICT reference here by 6%, 5%, and 21% for a US-sized car, because the teardown report was looking at the smaller sized cars for the European market, for crossover, sedan, and SUV. Indirect costs accounts for various overheads, administration, and equipment amortization, marketing costs, and R&D. It's believed that for general conventional vehicles, this indirect cost appears to be about 20% or 21%, somewhere in there. That's not looking at the markup for dealership and profit margins. But just as a cost for production, the indirect cost appears to be this much. There's various opinions on how to account for the indirect costs on the electrified powertrains, because those are generally low production volumes. However, it's believed that in the future, more or less everything will come out to about the same level of indirect costs. Other markups include profitability margin for the OEM, dealer markup that includes the dealer cost and profitability margin for the dealer, and then average tax as for the US average, assumed about 8.5%. So long term, other than the powertrain, pretty much everything else in the vehicle we assume to be about the same or scaling at the same rate. So if we looked at the purchase cost for the vehicle except powertrain, everything is the same. We add the powertrain minus the battery. And we notice that the PHEV, because it includes both motor and engine, is slightly higher here. And then you add in the battery, then the various markups, and that's what you get for a purchase cost. For the 2030 baseline scenario, battery is getting cheaper, motor is getting slightly cheaper. That's how the picture looks like in our baseline 2030 scenario. Next, we look at running costs. And when looking at running costs, it's important to draw the distinction between when a plug-in vehicle is operating in electric mode or consuming gas. For that, we've looked at the California Household Travel Survey, which had about 3,000 vehicles instrumented and driving for about a week, full monitoring second by second. What we see here in this slide is a plot of the amount or the number of miles driven on a single day as a total fraction of the total VMT throughout the whole study. Okay. Now, if this were to be driven by a 50-mile PHEV, then if you're driving less than 50 miles on a given day, then all your miles are driven electric mode. But if you're driving more than 50 miles, then the vehicle automatically switches to gas and you get some gas miles. The utility factor is essentially referring to the fraction in the black box, in the orange boxes, electric miles, divided by the total amount of miles. Now, if you do the same for a BEV of a certain range, with an assumption of an overnight charge, what you get is basically on a given day, if your number of miles driven is less than your range, then that's good, you drive your BEV. But if not, then what you actually do is you drive a different vehicle, whether it's second vehicle household, or if it's a rental vehicle or a taxi. At this point, we note that for BEVs, you not only account for difference in cost of electricity versus difference of cost in gasoline, but you're also putting miles on a second household vehicle. So you account for added cost for that. Or if you're doing a rental vehicle or mobility as a service, it would even cost more. The cost model we adopted in this work was a second household vehicle using basically the government compensation rates if you would drive your own vehicle on a government errand. Other thing is that range anxiety, or you wouldn't typically drive an electric vehicle and risk getting stranded. So some safety margins, just as when you don't drive your gas vehicle until it's fully zero beyond the marker on your gas tank. Next, prices for gasoline and electricity. We adopted the EIA averages for 2018 and the average numbers for predictions for 2030 for both cost of gasoline and electricity. We looked at maintenance cost per mile per AAA reports. And I would add that the AAA reports don't have enough electric vehicle SUVs and crossovers. So for those numbers, we simply scaled up the average maintenance of a sedan electric vehicle by the same proportions as a crossover SUV conventional vehicle to a sedan conventional vehicle. As I mentioned earlier on a previous slide, the cost of a replacement vehicle per mile, we've adopted the US government mileage reimbursement rates, which are generally less than if you were to go out and rent a vehicle or use a taxi service or a mobility as a service like Uber or Lyft. And then there's a flat rate cost model for registration and insurance per year. Now, putting it all together, also accounting for a resale value. And this is again using Kelley Blue Book, comparing model year 2019 versus model year 2014 of certain vehicles on the market. And it varies by location. We've looked at various or 3 zip codes in California for various conventional ICE and 2 models for plug-in hybrids, as well as 2 models for battery electric vehicles. I would add that we would have liked to look at more models and get more averages. However, there aren't that many model year 2014 plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles on the market, or there weren't that many in 2014. So to conduct the study, we had to work with what we were able to obtain. The average resale value for both conventional ICEs and plug-in hybrids seemed to hover around 50%. It was a bit lower than that for battery electric vehicles, around 40%. And then that again pertains to earlier talks today about the uncertainty about the battery range and how much battery life is left in the vehicle. So that might be it. We might see this improve in the future, but for our current study, this is what we're seeing in the open source data that we are able to access. And then again, putting it now all together, the purchase cost minus resale value for the 2018 and 2030 baseline scenarios looks like that. And then we add the running cost of gasoline, electricity, and the replacement vehicles in case of BEVs, as well as the other flat fees and maintenance. So this is how the baseline scenario in our analysis for 2030 looks like. ICE still lower cost of TCO even in 2030 baseline scenario. PHEVs or PHEV 50 coming close, but not quite breaking even. And then BEVs, the longer range become more attractive, but again, not quite breaking even with either other 2 vehicles. And at this point, I turn it back in to Ken for the sensitivity analysis.
Okay, you can hear me now? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, this is basically restating the numbers that Kareem just showed. And what we want to now do is consider some extreme cases. So on top of the modeling that Kareem quickly but thoroughly reviewed, we consider the case where both motor systems and the battery systems are 20% less. And so we go from the scenario on the left to the scenario on the right. And, you know, for the most part, this, so now we're at, you know, essentially 88 kilowatt hours, $88 per kilowatt hour for our BEV packs. The numbers shift a bit. Certainly all the vehicles except the ICE gets cheaper, but generally the same patterns are shown here. So if we want to consider now the TCO, what we see again with the less expensive version on the right, again, the TCO of the PHEV actually is coming very close to the ICE, and the BEVs are slightly higher, mostly because of the BEV replacement vehicle. And I think, honestly, I've seen lots of talks that try and answer roughly the same question. And I think that many of them don't include the BEV replacement vehicle costs, and thus generally find that the BEVs are closer to the ICE than the PHEVs. I will note that the ICCT report that's been cited a couple times does include this BEV replacement vehicle concept, and hopefully others will going forward. And then looking at the TCO, where we're not just considering all people the same, the figure on the far left is basically saying if everyone in California drove a vehicle, this is the kind of driving distributions you would have, and therefore this is how much fuel you would use, or things like that. So we became interested in knowing whether the more urban or less urban households would see something radically different. So basically, the more urban are essentially the 30% of the households in the CHTS that had the most urban looking drive style. So lots more stop and goes, much lower speeds, versus the group on the right, which is roughly the 30% least urban or most rural or most suburban. And so what we see is by the more urban folks, they tend to drive less miles overall. So that means that even the gas cost of the ICE isn't too large because of the restricted amount of driving. And on the flip side, if you look at the less urban drivers, you see even more pronounced costs of gas for the ICE, with the PHEV just barely edging out the cost on a TCO basis, where the BEVs have much more pronounced replacement vehicle costs. And again, the replacement vehicle cost is not the cost of a second car. It is simply the 58 cents of depreciation that you would add to another car in your household on the days that you needed to drive further than your range of the BEV. So, and of all the other options such as rental or taxi and all that, this is the least cost penalized way of determining the BEV replacement vehicle cost. And then one small variation of that where we try and make gas even more expensive. So before we were using EIA average values for cost of gasoline in 2030. Now we're using the upper bound of $5.11 per gallon. And again, nothing surprising here. Those cars that use more gas get more expensive from a TCO perspective. Those that use less gas go in the other direction. So in summary, what we've presented here is a bottom-up cost model for acquisition costs and total cost of ownership. We've used purely public data sources and open sources calculations. We do have a spreadsheet which is linked in our paper. I'll explain how to get that, and we encourage people to download that. If they have a different model for motors, if they have a different model for battery pricing, then hopefully this will save them some work, and we can try to do some apples to apples comparisons. I also just want to point out that you don't see in the literature so many detailed studies of the price of the motors, and that's why I kind of got very excited by the previous talk, because they're talking about revisiting that work, and I certainly would welcome anyone who could come forward with what they believe is a strong, well validated model for the motor subsystem. So in general, we found motor subsystems to be a bit more expensive than the other literature, and that also is impacting the plug-in vehicle cost. Of course, much uncertainty exists, and in general, we have other work that we've done that tries to compare GHG performance with costs, and so if it turns out, notwithstanding what I just said, the cost of the battery really still remains the hard thing to estimate. You know, if we knew that the batteries were going to be, you know, dirt cheap in 5 years, as some are predicting, then, you know, those would be less expensive than just about any other car, and customers would probably demand them, and I think most OEMs would be happy to sell them if they could sell them in a sustainable, slightly profitable way. The total cost of ownership, however, within the scope of our adopted assumptions, the TCO is possible for some plug-in vehicles, especially in kind of our sensitivity analysis. But the parity and purchase cost, while it closes quite a bit, it's still unlikely to kind of cross over in the 2030 timeframe, where again, our battery pack price is on the order of $100 per kilowatt hour. So whether you think that's going to happen after 2030 or before 2030, our work basically gives you a sense of what the world would look like where there's $100 battery packs. And then, of course, we're interested in even more data. Like I said, we would be very, you know, a lot of the pricing models that we saw, especially for the motor, kind of date back to, you know, the early 2000s. Those, I think, are long overdue to be updated, and we would welcome any contact with people who have knowledge of an updated model for that. Of course, the battery estimate costs change every year, so we also have to incorporate those changes as they come. And then finally, when you really look at household car purchases, it turns out that most households do not replace all of their cars at one time. They often fall into this pattern of having a slightly larger, more comfortable, more spacious, more cargo space car for long road trips and other functions with, you know, essentially all the family members. And then a smaller car, you know, a second car that might be a commuter car, it might be an errand car or whatever. And so when people are actually going to make a decision about a purchase, it depends on which of those two cars that they're trying to replace. And we haven't really tried to incorporate that into our current modeling, and we'd be interested in doing that going forward. And then finally, the first link is a link to we just recently published the previous work, or the work presented here, in an SAE World Congress paper just a month ago, and you can go get a link. You can, with that link, go get a copy of that paper, and then there is our contact information as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ken. Well, you could tell from Mike's presentation before, I think it was the indirect cost issue, right? That was coming up. That I noticed that part. But one question I had for you was the issue related to the vehicles themselves. And you know, when you were doing, it helps if I had my microphone turned on.
Well, we could hear you, so maybe you're coming from another microphone.
It could be. the when you were doing the resale value, you were looking at a Focus EV and a Leaf.
Yep.
Obviously, those are not current vehicles in terms of resale value. Were you only looking at those vehicles, those two vehicles, when you were doing the rest of the modeling?
Well, again, we're looking at cars that were sold 5 years ago because our work is based on a 5-year ownership line. So we didn't, there was no Model 3 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
There was no Model X 5 years ago. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford it even if there was one. But to the broader point, it is true that we see in data a lower resale value or a lower residual price for BEVs as compared to ICE cars or PHEVs. And I think that's pretty robustly shown in the data. Granted, there have been only a small number of cars that we've had enough years to really bear that out. And I think it's a very fair question of whether that that reduction, that extra cost reduction in the residual for BEVs is something that will go away, right? So before Toyota brought the Prius, there was also a concern that the resale value of Priuses would be very low because people were concerned that you'd need to go and replace the battery every 8 years. And as it turns out, that isn't the case. And so the residual value of a Prius has increased with that marketplace experience. And so, in 5 years, in 10 years, if the residual floats back up because it turns out people don't need to replace the battery, people do have a better understanding of the residual life in their battery, and all that kind of filters into the economy, and people are able to make more rational or data-based decisions. That would be great. But on the flip side, it seems also very possible that secondhand BEVs will continue to see a discount in their residual value. Again, we're just at a point, we're using the data that we have today, and that's what the data says today. And of course, if the data changes going forward, we would incorporate that into a new updated version of this price model.
Okay, thank you.
I'd add that it's a little bit, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'd add a little bit difficult to detangle battery expected life from like the iPhone phenomenon. So who wants to buy an iPhone 2 years after it was already come? Like a 2-year-old iPhone is not as valuable as a new one.
Right.
So for especially present day electric vehicle buyers, they want the latest and greatest, right? So that might also factor in for the aftermarket price or the second owner price.
One question that came in is, it said, just to be clear, the second vehicle assumption is that the BEV is charging and the customer uses an ICE vehicle instead, right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right. That's
So the idea would be like, you need to go pick up your mother at the airport, and it's a 70-mile one-way trip. So even if you think you can get there, you may not know, like, are you going to have to do any detours? Is your wife going to send you to Kroger to get some milk and bread? Or, maybe Susie's piano lesson is running behind, and so you have to call an audible and go pick her up when that wasn't part of your plan. We do see evidence that people with uncertain driving tend to leave their BEV at home. And again, we're at the early stages of observing this behavior. A lot of those people are early adopters, so we won't know how that's going to, shake out in 5 or 10 years as more consumers or a larger fraction of drivers adopt those vehicles. But yes, that's a very long way of saying to the questioner, yes, you got it right. You leave that car home, or you swap cars with your partner, and you take the car that's doesn't appear to be range limited.
Right. Mike, do you have
But just for that one day, and the next day, you go back to driving the BEV.
Right. Mike, do you have any questions based on the presentation?
Yeah, I think that what Ken is talking about right now in terms of needing the other vehicle in order to cover the inadequacy of the range. One thing that might change that in the future is the greater availability of ultra fast or even just fast charging, because the main difference there is that you don't have a gas station you can go to. When you're on your way to pick up your mother from the airport 70 miles away, you might go with an empty tank, and then you can fill up anytime you want. And that's the big difference that we're getting at here, is that it's not so much that there's a relatively short range at electric vehicles, but even if you have a long range, you're still faced with a very long wait to recharge it. So you wouldn't want to be stuck at a level 2 charging station somewhere for 2.5 hours while your mother is sitting there in the car. Like, when can we go? So that's really what it gets to. And so we have to understand that infrastructure, this is just another way of expressing the fact that the lack of widespread public infrastructure manifests itself in this way.
Yeah, but on the flip side, even if we kind of wish away the large expense that would be trying to create not just level 2 chargers in a lot of places, but level 3 chargers in a lot of places, and notwithstanding the fact that we've fallen way short of just about all predicted amount of charging infrastructure since the beginning of the Obama presidency. The other thing you mentioned, Gil at UC Davis, and he made an off kind of just a throwaway line, which I found really interesting when I talked to him. And he says that based on his data, BEV owners will take one long BEV trip, meaning that they're gung-ho. They've mapped their path from there to, Washington, D.C., and they know where they're going to stop, and they're going to have lunch there. They know where they're going to eat, and they do it, and then they never do it again. That the reality is, when you already have 8 to 10 hours of driving, you don't want to add another one or another 2. And that, so even if you can bring it down to 15 or 20 minutes, that's still, quite a bit longer than a gas fill. And so whether people will put up with that or if that will change with, a mass adoption of high-speed chargers, we can hope so. But, I think we have to also pay attention to the way customers are behaving today.
Yeah, do you have a reference for like a paper that combines all of this sort of information? If you do, I'd like to add it to my list because I think it's important to show the whole breadth of the predictions that are coming out there right now. The MIT study, Futures in Mobility, I believe it's called, is probably the most pessimistic of the studies that we see. And it has some scenarios where cost parity is either never achieved or it's maybe achieved by 2030 for TCO. And so it'd be good to add your paper to this because it does include some variables and some considerations that some of the other studies don't have.
Yeah, well, our paper is downloadable today. Gil's, recently had his big EVMT study posted by CARB. But it's long and it's very dense, and I think there's going to be a lot of conference papers coming out of it here in the past year, in the next year or two. So I would watch this space.
I would also add that though we didn't include it in this current SAE paper, the utility factors could be recalculated with assumption of fast charging available, because the trips in the data set have time signature, and you can watch for that 45-minute window between trip and the start of the next trip, and then you can assume a fast charging opportunity there. I don't know if we've published publicly our utility factors recalculated with daytime charging. However, we can do that. And the open source spreadsheet allows a user to update those utility factors accordingly. So,
Yeah, that's very helpful to be able to look at the spreadsheet itself and see how things work. And I'm glad you guys were able to make that a public information.
Okay.
Well, we've run out of time. Wanted to thank you guys for sticking around and presenting and give us your insight. For everybody who's been with us, thank you for staying with us for the whole conference. We hope you found some interesting information. I know I have. And we'll see you next time for Automotive IT, Internet of Things.